You've used a phrase, I want to make sure I understand what you mean by it. You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing that.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk about it?
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist.
I'm denying that trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies?
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get pregnant.
So you are denying that trans people exist?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you?
Absolutely.
Or are they also treated like this, where
No,
they're told that they're opening up people to violence?
We have a good time in my class. You should join.
I bet.
You might learn a lot.
Wow, I would learn a lot. I've learned a lot just in this exchange.
Absolutely.
Extraordinary. We were supposed to do 2 rounds of questions. You said you had to be somewhere, so we cut it short. Republicans were not able to ask a second round as we had been informed we would. The press reported shortly thereafter that the reason that the hearing had to be cut short is because you were flying on a Gulfstream jet for a personal vacation in the Adirondacks. Please tell me that's not accurate.
Senator, the hearing was not cut short from my experience. We had agreed beforehand on the time and length of it, and I was very surprised to find that anyone on the committee was surprised. As to how I fly, I am required, not only permitted, but required to fly on an FBI plane wherever I go. That's
so you were going on vacation?
I was, yes.
So you left a statutorily required oversight hearing in order to go on a personal vacation in the Adirondacks?
I took a flight to go visit my family, as had been previously arranged in conjunction with the leadership of the committee.
The ranking member, Chuck Grassley, asked you during the hearing, he said, I assume you must have other business. You said, yes. He then said, if you have a business trip, you've got your own plane, can't it wait a while? He then said, Chuck Grassley, we only just heard half an hour ago that now you have to leave. We were going to have a 7-minute round followed by a 3-minute round. I've got 7 people on my side of the aisle, that included me, who are waiting for this additional round. Is there any reason we can't accommodate them for 21 minutes? And you said you had a plane to catch. You had somewhere to go. And now we find out it was for vacation?
The reference to other business was not a reference to that day. It was a reference to the following week where Senator Grassley and I were going to see each other in Iowa when I had other business in Iowa, and I did, in fact, see him then.
So wait, you had to leave the hearing early because you're going to see him later in Iowa in a week?
No, I had to leave when I said I was going to have to leave, as had been previously organized with the leadership of the committee.
You left an oversight hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee required by statute so you could vacation with your family. I find that absolutely unbelievable and, frankly, indefensible. Now, is it your practice to use government planes? You say you do this all the time. You flew in a Gulfstream 550, I think, that was originally purchased for counterterrorism purposes. You were using it to go to, what is it, Saranac Lake? Is that how I say it? I've never been there. Is that the right pronunciation? Saranac Lake? That was your destination?
Yes.
So, did you enjoy the flight? I mean, did you pay for it?
Yes, I paid for it.
Will you turn over all receipts and reimbursement to this committee?
Senator, we will be happy to comply with oversight requests related to the use of the plane, as I said, and it's important for people to understand.
Why don't you just give me a yes? Will you turn over the receipts for your flight?
I will turn over the information related to my
committee?
Use of the plane. The use of the plane, I am required, not just permitted, required, even for personal travel, to use the FBI plane.
How convenient for you.
And I pay every single time that I use the plane for personal
I'm
use,
glad it's
I pay
available for
beforehand.
you to jet away from your statutorily required hearings and oversight before this Congress, where you denied the ability of members of Congress to ask you questions because you had to go on a personal vacation using a government plane. Let's just look at some of the things while you've been vacationing that your FBI has been doing. According to numerous whistleblowers who have come forward to members of this body, to members of the House, the FBI has been sending more than, in one instance, a dozen armed agents to a rural Pennsylvania home of a Catholic pro-life demonstrator to arrest him at gunpoint in front of his children in early morning hours, despite the fact that he posed no risk of violence or threat and had previously offered to turn himself in. Numerous whistleblowers, field agents, have alleged that D.C., your headquarters, has pulled them off working on child sex abuse cases, working on human trafficking cases, in order to work on January 6th matters for this reason, to give the appearance, they say, that there are hundreds of new domestic terrorism cases in the country, when in fact there are not. Whistleblowers, field agents have also said that D.C. has ordered the use of SWAT teams on nonviolent suspects who may have attended a January 6th rally, and they have been ordered to conduct surveillance and knock on doors of people who were not even in D.C. on January 6th. And again, all of this, according to the whistleblowers, these are your agents, all of this in order to make it look as if there's a mass surge in domestic terrorism all across the country, when in fact, the stats are being padded by political directive in your office. They also say, these whistleblowers, the D.C. leadership deliberately suppressed investigations into Hunter Biden, contrary to FBI procedure, and have also retaliated against FBI agents and whistleblowers who have contacted Congress, which, by the way, they are protected by statute to do so. This is what's happening at your FBI while you are evading oversight hearings. Mr. Director, do you think you're still up to this job?
I absolutely think I'm still up to this job, and I think our workforce feels the same way.
Well, I don't. And frankly, I think you should have been gone a long time ago. And given your behavior recently, I think it only makes it more clear. Are there any travel plans today that we should be aware of that you have? We're supposed to have a second round. Will you be here for that?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've said now several times that the school only wanted the court case to be tried in a court of law, not in the media. But your attempt to strip anonymity from Chessie was exactly an attempt to try this case in the media, right? It was an attempt to bring her name forward so everybody would know who she was. She's 16. Everybody would know exactly who she was, could look her up, could threaten her, intimidate her. I mean, this was an attempt to put her squarely into the media spotlight nationally, right?
Senator, thank you for the question. I respectfully disagree that the school's intent in trying to require the lawyers to try the case in the court of law was in any way intended to intimidate any of the parties to the case.
How can you say that when you knew full well that a 16-year-old girl would have her name published, would have reporters, no doubt, in her front lawn, would have people following her around with cameras everywhere? Her family's sitting here today. They've already been through hell. Your motion was an attempt to put them through further hell in order to defend your client, right?
Senator, I was an advocate for the school.
I understand that, but as advocates, I have been too. And as advocates, we make decisions, but we're responsible for those decisions. You made a decision here. You made a decision to try to strip a young girl of her anonymity, and you effectively succeeded because you bullied her into it. So she, unwilling to be intimidated by you, went forward and revealed her own name, which took, by the way, tremendous courage. And I'd just like to honor her for her courage in doing that. But you put her to that choice. You did. That was your choice. So that's fine. You made the choice, but now you're accountable for it. So let's have some accountability here. You deliberately did this in a way that would put her at risk, and that was your intent. Have you read the letter that she submitted to this committee?
I have read the letter that was submitted to this committee.
Let me read some of it to you. She says, and I quote, I remember so clearly reading Michael Delaney's motion from front to back when I came home from my new high school one day, processing what it meant, and then defiantly stating to my parents that after everything I'd been dragged through, from anonymous death and rape threats on the internet to the betrayal of and backlash from my closest friends at school, I wasn't going to let Michael Delaney's dirty tactics bully me, then 16 years old, into shame and silence. She goes on, and this is important. When survivors of sexual assault, harassment, and abuse come forward to seek some semblance of justice, there is an army of attorneys with a tried and true playbook of tactics to discredit, pressure, and manipulate survivors and victims into silence. Those were the tactics that you used, Mr. Delaney.
Senator, I respectfully disagree with that characterization of the role I played as an advocate in the case. The school agreed to allow the case to proceed with anonymity. I have...
No, you didn't. You filed a motion that specifically sought to strip her anonymity. I have it right here. I've read it, and I've read your reasons for doing so. The school didn't like the time that the parents and Chessie filed their lawsuit. You complain that counsel filed the complaints minute before the clerk of the court's office closed on June 1st, 2016. Well, I'm sorry for you, but I don't understand why your inconvenience about the time should mean that this young woman should have to surrender her anonymity and have her life. She's a survivor of sexual assault, let's not forget. That already happened. You knew that. Why should she have to have her life further destroyed because you didn't like the timing of the filing?
Senator, I represented the school in that case. I did not represent the Prout family. I understood what they went through. The school felt that the request to restrict the lawyers from trying the case in the media was compatible with her desire to proceed with privacy and anonymity.
I don't understand what you're saying. You filed a motion that sought to strip her anonymity. You told the court that it should happen because you didn't like the time at which her counsel filed their complaint because it put your school at an inconvenience. They had to answer reporter questions, you said. Frankly, that seems to me like a small burden to bear after what Chessie went through. So you made the decision. You forced her to come forward. She was brave and did it, and now you're accountable for that. And quite frankly, I'm astounded you've been nominated. I can't believe we're sitting here having this conversation today. And I, for one, will not support your nomination for these reasons. People who put sexual assault victims through this kind of torture shouldn't sit on the bench. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn.
To start with why you enabled it. Can we just start with that? Why is it that you have enabled 345,000 children to be smuggled across this border and then sent into the hands of modern-day slave traders? In 2021, you made the decision to change Title 42 to allow unaccompanied children to come into the United States and then to be sent into the interior of the country. Under the last administration, children were reunited with their families in their home country. You changed that, and as soon as you changed it, the numbers exploded. That is your responsibility.
Quite a number of false statements, Senator.
What is false about that statement?
So if I can state what I've been trying to state, one of the significant policy decisions that we have made is to focus our worksite enforcement investigative efforts, our criminal investigative efforts on unscrupulous employers that exploit individuals because of their vulnerabilities, and that includes underage workers.
That is not what the New York Times investigation found. Mr. Chairman, I just ask at this point, I'd like to enter into the record the New York Times article, as migrant children were put to work, U.S. ignored warnings. This is from April 17th, 2023. This is this morning. And I'd also like to enter into the record the New York Times article, Alone and Exploited Migrant Children Work Brutal Jobs Across the U.S. This is from February 25th, 2023. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What these articles show, Mr. Secretary, is that the administration has done nothing but facilitate this crisis. You changed Title 42. You allowed hundreds of thousands of migrant children to come across the border, and then you made it worse. When they became a political crisis for you. When that huge surge of kids across the border because you changed Title 42, when it became an optics crisis, what did you do? You began pressuring officials and agencies to skip the vetting process and get these kids out as soon as possible to sponsors who weren't vetted. Here's the times again. As shelters filled with children, the administration began loosening vetting restrictions and urging case managers to speed the process along. You have at every stage facilitated this modern-day indentured servitude of minor children. Why should you not be impeached for this?
Senator, I look forward to discussing this issue further because you are misstating the facts so terribly.
I am reading you the facts from articles in the news, and your usual modus operandi is what you're doing again today, was just to deny. Why have you permitted 345,000 children to come into this country unaccompanied? Why have you permitted thousands of them to be abused and exploited?
Senator, what we do is we enforce the law. But let me just say this.
You're not.
It is stunning to me, stunning, to hear you say that the prior administration reunited children with their parents.
Oh, I see.
When
So
in
this
fact-
is their fault?
When in
So
fact,
but you're not going to take any responsibility for the indentured servitude and exploitation of children that is happening on your watch. A moment ago, you were crowing about the fact that you treated children so well, and yet we find tens of thousands of children who are forced to work as slaves because of your policies, and you turn around and blame a prior administration. Mr. Secretary, this is par for the course for you. You do it every time you appear before this committee. You do it every time you appear before Congress. I, for one, am sick and tired of it, and thousands of children are in physical danger because of what you are doing. You should have resigned long ago, and if you cannot change course, you should be removed from office. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kelly, Senator Hawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, I've just got one more question for you about these many book interviews that you did. I Alone Can Fix It's one book, Perils, another book. Frankly, we did win this election. The inside story of how Trump lost is the third book. Seems like that's a significant outlay of time.
I don't think so. I think that
They were short interviews.
relatively short. I don't think it took an excessive amount of time.
What was the time frame on these interviews for these three different books? These are deep, by the way, these are for folks who don't know at home. You said you didn't read the books. I don't think most people probably do. These are DC Insider tell-all type books. But what was the time frame, did you say, that you were doing these interviews?
I would say it took a couple of hours, maybe.
But when? What's the time frame? When were you sitting for them? Dates?
I can get you the dates. I don't know.
This
I don't know
year?
off the top of my head, but I'll get you the dates.
2021?
Oh, yeah.
So it was this calendar year.
I think so, yeah, sure.
Well, I just am wondering, is clearly this was a priority for you. You did these on the record, by the way? All these interviews are on the record with these reporters? They quote you?
I do interviews on the record, off the record, and I do background interviews. And I do all of that with print media, television media, books, documentaries, all kinds of things.
I thought, why would you do background and off the record interviews? Background means you can't quote you. Background and off the record interviews if the goal is transparency.
The transparency goes to the fact to make sure that we are explaining ourselves and make sure that these authors have correct information.
Not attributable
let's
to
take
you?
Woodward, for example, probably 200 people interviewed, and they approach my guys to say, are these facts true? This is what we heard. So we clarify and mitigate any incorrect information.
Interesting. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're doing these interviews, you're doing them in 2021. It just makes me wonder, all of these different books, were you maybe a little distracted? Maybe a little distracted about what was going on in Afghanistan? Here's why I'm asking. General Miller testified to this committee that he warned about the rapid erosion of the military situation in Afghanistan as early as March of 2021. He further testified that he informed you about his view on this. He also testified that he said that the collapse of the Afghan security forces and the Afghan government could come very fast in 2021.
Hard and fast.
And he said that he informed you this. He also said that he informed Secretary Austin of this.
He did.
Now, at the same time, however, in June, you were saying, and I quote you now, an outright takeover by the Taliban is unlikely. That's at Armed Services Committee meeting in the House, June 23rd. In July, you said the Afghan security forces have the capacity to sufficiently fight and defend their country. You also said that they were well equipped. On June 17th, you told the Senate Appropriations Committee the Afghan government had a 325 to 350,000 person security force, which we now know is a drastic overestimate. A few days later, you lowered that to 300,000, which we still know is a drastic overestimate. Your generals on the ground, your commander on the ground is saying one thing. The Taliban has a massive offensive underway from May 1st on, but yet you told us very different things in public. How do you reconcile those things? What am I missing?
Well, first of all, Scott Miller did say hard and fast, and he also meant that, at least to me and to others, that he meant that to be in the fall, October, November, maybe even December timeframe.
I heard you say that earlier.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. I have to
Yeah.
tell you, that wasn't his testimony to this committee.
Well, what he said in the committee was hard and fast. He didn't put a date on it. Is the readouts to me? I don't know. Did he put a date on it?
No, he didn't put a date on
But he
it.
did
You
put
put
a
a date on it. That's what intrigues me.
But he did put a date on it with me and to us. And when pressed, it was after we leave. That was point one, which was 31 August, and probably into the October timeframe, maybe Thanksgiving. And that is about more or less where many of the intel assessments were.
He said he was a dissenter on the intel
he did.
assessment.
That's right.
And he didn't put any of those qualifiers on his testimony to us. So are you saying he shifted his testimony, General Miller, that he wasn't?
No, I'm saying what he told me was it was likely to be in the October timeframe. The intel assessments are centering around November, Thanksgiving at the latest, Christmas. Some intel assessments went into the next year. Here's my point, Senator, is the intel assessments had two basic things, in my view, was the scale and scope plus the speed. All the intel assessments, all of us, got that wrong. There's no question about it. That was a swing and a miss on the intel assessment of 11 days in August. There's nobody that called that.
Well,
How do
can
you
I
know
just,
that
General,
Mark
my time is about, I appreciate that you've made these points. I don't mean to cut you off. It's just that my time is about to expire. I just want to say this. It seems to me that you put a high priority on making sure that you were favorably portrayed by the D.C. press corps. You spent a lot of time doing that. Fair enough if that's your priority. But at the same time, we had a rapidly deteriorating, frankly, disastrous situation in Afghanistan, which resulted in the death of 13 soldiers, including one from my home state, hundreds of civilians, and hundreds of Americans left behind. And in my view, that mission can't be called a success in any way, shape, or form, logistical or otherwise. General, I think you should resign. Secretary Austin, I think you should resign. I think this mission was a catastrophe. I think there's no other way to say it, and there has to be accountability. I respectfully submit it should begin with you.
Senator,
Thank you,
time's
Mr. Chairman.
expired.
Your name is on a memo with Mr. Silvers dated September 13th, 2021. The subject is organizing DHS efforts to counter disinformation. This is the memo that recommended the establishment of the Disinformation Board. It was turned over to me and to Senator Grassley by a whistleblower. I have to tell you, we've had the darndest time getting any information about this board out of your agency. We've asked and we've asked, members of this committee have asked. We would know virtually nothing had it not been for this whistleblower who turned over a tranche of documents, all of which are now public. So since I have you here and you wrote the memo, let me just ask you a question or two about it. Whose idea was it to establish this board?
Senator, the Department of Homeland Security has engaged in disinformation work pertaining to threats to the homeland and the American people for over a decade. With respect to this internal working group, there were discussions about the need to ensure that there were guardrails in place across the department to protect civil rights and civil liberties and privacy. And as such, there were discussions about creating this internal working group.
Well, yeah, all of that I noticed is in the passive voice. My question is, whose idea was it to set up the? And you use the word working group, but I noticed that that's not at all what the memo says. It doesn't call it a working group. The directive that Mr. Mayorkas eventually signed off on does not make this board a working group. It had managerial authority, it had directive authority, all of that's in these documents. So let's please not go back to those tired and now disproven talking points. So let me come back to my question. Whose idea was it to establish the board? Was it yours?
Senator, without going into internal deliberations of the Department of Homeland Security, there were a series of discussions among personnel.
Who?
I'm not going to go into the internal deliberations of the department.
Why not? You're under oath.
I am under oath, sir. That said, these are internal deliberations at the department. As you know, sir, the charter was signed by the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Yeah, I only know that, by the way, because of the whistleblower documents. We would not know that otherwise.
Senator, the charter was signed by the Secretary of Homeland Security. The charter included, the working group included representation.
Does the charter call it a working group, since you bring up the charter?
This was a working group, sir.
Does the charter call it a working group?
I don't recall the charter.
No, the answer is it does not. So was it your idea to establish the board?
As I testified, Senator, under oath, the establishment of the working group was a decision taken, a conversation that was had among multiple individuals at the Department of
Okay,
Homeland
so you're not going to answer my question. Ms. Jankowicz, Nina Jankowicz, she was appointed to run this disinformation board. How was she chosen?
Ms. Jankowicz was chosen consistent with practices for the hiring and vetting of political appointees.
Walk me through that process. Who was involved?
I don't know the full scope of that process.
You weren't involved in it?
I was involved in one piece of that process.
What was the piece that you were involved in?
I spoke with Ms. Jankowicz.
At what point?
As part of the standard process for political appointees, I spoke with Ms. Jankowicz.
What time frame would this have been?
This would have been, sir, I don't want to give you an incorrect answer.
It's okay, give me just a frame.
Early 2021.
Okay,
February.
January?
I don't recall the exact date, sir. I can get back to you on that.
Okay, January, February time period, perhaps. That would be early 2021. The Secretary signed the charter, I believe, in February of 2021. When did the Secretary sign off on Ms. Jankowicz being the head of the board?
Senator, I don't know that the Secretary signed off on Ms. Jankowicz or not. As
Oh, really?
I mentioned, I'm not aware.
He testified it was his decision.
I believe the Secretary testified that he was ultimately responsible for Ms. Jankowicz. I don't know.
So it wasn't his decision?
Senator, I just said I don't know the full scope of that.
Did you recommend favorably Ms. Jankowicz to the Secretary?
After speaking with Ms. Jankowicz, I was impressed by her expertise during our conversation and noted my recommendation to others in the department.
Were you, so you recommended yes. I think that sounds like it's a yes. You recommended favorably. Did you, at the time that you spoke with her and recommended with her, were you aware of her long history of comments on Twitter and other platforms of disinformation, anti-free speech rhetoric, and so forth, which has since become, I think it's safe to say, infamous?
Senator, I was aware of Ms. Jankowicz's expertise in the field of disinformation and was impressed by her expertise.
Did you know about these? Did you know about her many comments spreading disinformation about Russia, about the Trump administration, about conservatives? Secretary Mayorkas, just to by comparison, said he was not aware of any of this at the time. I'm just curious, were you aware at the time you recommended her to him?
Senator, in my capacity as Acting Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism, Threat Prevention, and Law Enforcement Policy, I had not read all of Ms. Jankowicz's tweets, but as I said, was aware of her expertise in this.
Well, when you say you hadn't read all of her tweets, does that mean that she, I'm sure, has a lot of tweets, but were you familiar with the ones that have since become public?
I was not, sir.
Okay, you were not aware at the time. Did anybody bring those to your attention at any time before they became publicly released in this process, this vetting process?
Not to my recollection.
Okay, so somehow she got through this vetting process with no one, including all the way up to the Secretary, apparently aware of what she had said on these public platforms. I find that sort of extraordinary. Was the White House involved in the selection of Ms. Jankowicz?
I'm not aware of the full scope of the process, or as a presidential, as a political appointee, the standard processes were followed.
So, to your knowledge, the White House was not involved. Is that fair to say?
My knowledge is I'm a political appointee. The White House was involved in my process, so I believe that is standard practice for the White House to be involved.
So so you think that they were involved in the selection of Ms. Jankowicz?
I'm not aware of the full scope of the hiring or vetting process. It was the same as pertains to other political.
Well, I'm just trying to get at what your knowledge is. So to your knowledge, I'm not asking you what you think may have happened, but to your knowledge, was the White House involved in selecting Ms. Jankowicz? Just yes or no?
I really don't know, sir.
Okay, you have no idea. All right. What's the current status of the Disinformation Board, to your knowledge?
Well, it's on pause.
And what does that mean exactly?
It means the Disinformation Governance Board never met. The Secretary has asked the Homeland Security Advisory Committee, the HSOC, to review how the department can most effectively address disinformation and how to do so in a way that protects civil rights and civil liberties. He has also asked that the HSOC review how the department can be as transparent as possible with the American public and increase trust in the work that we do. The HSAC was asked to conduct their review within 75 days, and while that work is pending, the Disinformation Governance Board, or the DGB, just is on pause. It's not meeting. There's not work underway.
Last question. I know there are other senators waiting to ask questions. Did the board ever meet, any members of the board ever meet with Twitter executives? We know we have minutes of planned meetings with Twitter executives to ask for cooperation in tracking speech. Did that ever happen at any point, to your knowledge?
I disagree with your characterization of...
Did the meetings with the Twitter executives ever happen, to your knowledge?
If I can finish, I disagree with your characterization of the purpose of a meeting that never happened. The meeting with Twitter never happened.
Okay, to your knowledge, it never happened. Listen, I've got to let other senators question. I'll just say that I regret that it has taken months to get the most basic information about this board. And again, we would know none of this, none, had it not been for a whistleblower who turned over these documents. Frankly, that is totally, totally unacceptable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Attorney General Garland, let me just ask you, does your department have a problem with anti-Catholic bias?
Our department protects all religions and all ideologies. It does not have any bias against any religion of any kind.
Well, you could have surprised me, because given the resources that you are expending and the apparently intelligence assets that you are deploying against Catholics, it appears, and other people of faith, while simultaneously turning a blind eye while people are executed gang style in the streets of our cities, including in my home state, your answer frankly surprises me. Let's talk about the Mark Houck case, for example. You've been asked about this already today, and frankly, your answers really astound me. This is a case where a Catholic pro-life demonstrator, father, was accused of disorderly conduct in front of an abortion center. The local prosecutor, the Philadelphia district attorney, who is a Democrat, a liberal, very progressive, declined to prosecute. There was a private suit that got dismissed. And then after all of that, your Justice Department sent between 20 and 30 armed agents in the early morning hours to the Houck's private residence to arrest this guy after he had offered to turn himself in voluntarily. Here's the photo. Once again, you can see the long guns, you can see the ballistic shields, you can see that they're wearing bulletproof vests. Why did the Justice Department do this? Why did you send 20 to 30 SWAT-style agents and a SWAT-style team to this guy's house when everybody else had declined to prosecute and he'd offered to turn himself in?
Determinations of how to make arrests under arrest warrants are made based by the tactical operators in the district. They are not.
But you surely looked into it by this point, right? You know the answer, surely.
All I know is what the FBI has said, which is that they made decisions on the ground as to what was safest and easiest. So they do not agree with your description of what happened on the scene.
You don't agree with my description. I'm pointing out what the photo is. There are agents here who have long guns and ballistic shields. Let's take a look at the hardened criminals that your Justice Department sent these armed agents to go terrorize on that morning. Here they are. Here they are at Mass. Here's the 7 children with Mr. Houck and his wife. In this early morning, they were all at home. Mrs. Houck has said repeatedly the children were screaming. They feared for their lives. You've got these agents demanding that he come out. They've got the guns, she said, pointing at the house and at them. He has offered to turn himself in. And this is who you go to terrorize. What's really interesting to me is this seems to directly contradict your own memorandum about the use of force at the Justice Department. You say officers may use only the force that is objectively reasonable to effectively control an incident. Are you telling me that in your opinion as Attorney General, it was objectively necessary to use 20 or 30 SWAT-style agents with long guns and ballistic shields for these people?
What I'm saying is that decisions about how to go about this were made on the ground by FBI agents.
So you're saying you don't know?
I'm saying what I just said,
which is that
those
you're
dis-
abdicating responsibility?
I'm not abdicating
Then
responsibility.
give me the answer. Do you think, in your opinion, you are the Attorney General of the United States, you are in charge of the Justice Department, and yes, sir, you are responsible. So give me an answer.
The FBI does not agree with your description.
I'm not asking about the FBI. You are the Attorney General. Give me your answer. Do you think that it was objectively reasonable and they followed your guidelines in sending 20 to 30 armed agents to terrorize these people? Yes or no?
The facts I have, which are those presented by the FBI, are not consistent with your description.
So you think it was reasonable?
I'm saying the facts are not as you describe.
What, that the children weren't there? That there weren't long guns there? That there weren't agents? What do you dispute? What's the factual premise you dispute? Be
FBI
specific.
said they don't agree with your description of
Be specific. They don't agree with what?
of how many agents, of the agents who were there, and of what their roles were. They don't agree.
Do you know
That's
the
all I can
jury
say.
in this case acquitted Mr. Houck? As I'm sure you're aware. Do you know how long it took him?
I am aware, and we respect the decision of the jury.
Do you know how long it took him?
I don't know.
1 hour. 1 hour. Philadelphia District Attorney declines to prosecute. The private suit's dismissed. You use an unbelievable show of force with guns that I just note liberals usually decry. We're supposed to hate long guns and assault-style weapons. You're happy to deploy them against Catholics and innocent children. Happy to. And then you haul him into court and a jury acquits him in 1 hour. I just suggest to you that that is a disgraceful performance by your Justice Department and a disgraceful use of resources. I notice a pattern, though. The FBI field office in Richmond, on the 23rd of January of this year, issued a memorandum in which they advocated for, and I quote, the exploration of new avenues for tripwire and source development against traditionalist Catholics, it's their language, including those who favor the Latin Mass. Attorney General, are you cultivating sources and spies in Latin Mass parishes and other Catholic parishes around the country?
No, the Justice Department does not do that. It does not do investigations based on religion. I saw the document you have.
What did you do about it?
It's appalling. It's appalling. I'm in complete agreement with you. I understand that the FBI has withdrawn it, and it's now looking into how this could ever have happened.
How did it happen?
That's what they're looking into. But I'm totally in agreement with you. That document is appalling.
I'll tell you how it happened. This memorandum, which is supposed to be intelligent, cites extensively the Southern Poverty Law Center, which goes on to identify all of these different Catholics as being part of hate groups. Is this how the FBI, under your direction and leadership, is this how they do their intelligence work? They look at left-wing advocacy groups to target Catholics? Is this what's going on? I mean, clearly it is. How is this happening?
The FBI is not targeting Catholics, and as I've said, this is an inappropriate memorandum, and it doesn't reflect the methods that the FBI is supposed to be using. Should not be relying on any single organization without doing its own work.
Let me just ask you, as my time expires here, a very direct question. How many informants do you have in Catholic churches across America?
I don't know, and I don't believe we have any informants aimed at Catholic churches. We have a rule against investigations based on First Amendment activity, and Catholic churches are obviously First Amendment activity.
Well,
but I don't know a specific answer to your question.
You don't know the specifics of anything, it seems, but apparently on your watch, this Justice Department is targeting Catholics, targeting people of faith, specifically for their faith views. And Mr. Attorney General, I'll just say to you, it's a disgrace. You're asking to be appointed to a very important position in the DOD. Let me come back to some of these statements that you made. Religious freedom is twisted to mean conservative Christians can dictate their beliefs to the rest of us. Hashtag Hobby Lobby, repeal RFRA. When did you change your view on RFRA? You told Senator Cotton you're not in favor of repealing it. You were on June 30th, 2014. When did you change your mind?
I couldn't tell you exactly, Senator.
Why did you change your mind?
I couldn't tell you exactly, Senator.
You're choosing not to tell me, or you don't want to engage, or you don't like this line of questioning, or you don't think you need to be responsive?
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator. Of course, I do mean to be responsive. I don't recall the details of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and I want to be clear that I support religious freedom. I support the rights of our troops and our civilian employees to their religious freedom to the entire extent that the law allows within their employment in the Department of Defense. And I support that in every way. Yes, sir.
Why is it that you think that the vast majority of white evangelical leaders are utterly unmoored from the gospel of Jesus Christ? Can you explain that to me?
Senator, I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I have had differences of opinion from people who don't believe in full equality for all. But I will say it is wrong. It was wrong for me in that moment, and I believe it is always wrong to tarnish an entire group of people with the beliefs or actions of one or a few. And for that, I apologize.
You said that if getting a Supreme Court judge who'd outlaw abortion makes all of this worth it to you, referring to evangelicals, your religion has nothing to do with Jesus. You also say 86% of those who consider themselves white evangelicals support Trump. So which part of it disqualifies these people as Christians? Is it that they are opposed to abortion, or they supported Trump, or both? Help me understand your thinking.
I'm so sorry, Senator. Could you read that again? I'm sorry.
On September 4th, you said, 2017, 86% of those who consider themselves white evangelicals support Trump. You said in the same tweet thread, if getting a Supreme Court judge who'd outlaw abortion makes all this worth it to you, your religion has nothing to do with Jesus. So is it because they supported Trump that they're not followers of Jesus, or is it because they oppose abortion? Is it both?
Senator, I'm trying to put myself back in that moment. I know there were several points at which I felt that the president had made statements or taken actions that I felt were in direct contradiction with the way that I understand Jesus' teaching, and I'm expecting that I was reacting to that. Again, I don't believe we should ever tarnish a whole group of people for the actions of one.
Do you think that it's your position to tell people when they are and aren't followers of Christ, or truly Christians or not, just because they disagree with you? I understand you disagree with these folks, but saying over and over that they're not followers of Jesus. You cited Matthew 23 on August 29th, 2017, when you said the vast majority of white evangelical leaders are utterly unmoored from the gospel of Jesus Christ. Matthew 23 applies. You remember what you meant by that? Maybe a reference to the brood of vipers. It's Matthew 23.
Yes, Senator. Senator, none of what I've ever expressed on social media was intended to silence others. I believe there's a free expression of beliefs there, but I do believe that I apologize for statements at any time when I tarnished a whole group of people for the actions or statements of one or a few. And,
well, it's clearly meant to denigrate others. Listen, my time has expired. I just have to say, Ms. Fulton, it's not one statement. It's multiple statements over multiple years, running from 2014 through 2018. I mean, years. There's pages and pages of these statements, all directed at a particular group of people for whom you appear to have quite a significant amount of animus. You'd be expected to oversee many of these folks in the Department of Defense. I mean, that's not fairness. That's not equity. That's targeting. And for those reasons, among others, I can't support your nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Hawley.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary. I want to talk about the policies that have gotten us to where we are with our effectively open border. But let me first ask you about this. You said as recently as this week that the border is closed. Is that still your position today? Border is closed?
Yes, it is.
Don't you think you bear any responsibility for the current crisis by telling the world earlier this year that the border was open? Your words were, we're not telling you not to come. We're just telling you that we're putting a system back in place in which you can come. I mean, don't you think people took your words at face value then?
Senator, I've never said that the border is open, and I've never believed...
We're not telling you not to come. How would you parse that?
Senator, I've never said that the border is open, and I've never believed that it should be an open border. We have laws that Congress has passed that are laws of accountability and also laws of humanitarian relief.
You did say that we're not telling you not to come, though, right? You said that. You remember that?
I'm sorry, Senator. I apologize.
You remember saying, don't you, that we're not telling you not to come. Those are your words that you said in a press conference. You said that, right?
I don't recall saying that. I don't believe.
You don't recall saying that?
That's correct, Senator. I have never said.
We'd be happy to refresh your memory for you and some questions for the record. I'm sure that is interesting news, and I'm sure everyone will. The Secretary's just said he doesn't have any memory of making those comments. That's extraordinary.
Senator, I have never said that the border is open.
Let me ask you about this. CBP data says that the agency had 178,000 enforcement encounters at the southern border in April. It's the highest in 2 decades. Of that total, what percentage were subject to immediate expulsion?
I will get that data to you. I don't have that at my disposal this morning.
Is it 100%? Is it 60%? Is it 20%? Do you have any idea?
100% of families and single adults are subject to expulsion, except for those with acute vulnerabilities, and we exercise that discretion. However, our ability to actually expel families under CDC's Title 42 authority is limited by, for example, Mexico's ability and capacity, I should say, to receive the expelled families, and that is what we are addressing as a result.
Okay, I think the number is around 60% or so are subject to immediate expulsion, which means we have a very large percentage of migrants who were permitted entry into the United States and are still here. But we'll give that question again to you for the record so that you can go and look it up. Let me ask you this. Why is it that this week, actually late last night, it was reported that CBP terminated a flight program that transferred families across the southern border for purposes of expelling them under Title 42. These flights were apparently canceled due to the pressure of left-wing groups. Is that accurate?
Senator, we make our decisions as we consider to be most effective in furtherance of our mission and not because of pressure by outside groups. I'd be pleased to look into the cancellation of the lateral flights and respond to you after I've done so.
So you're telling me here that the ACLU had no role in the termination of these expulsion flights? Is that your testimony?
Senator, we are addressing the claims of the ACLU. The ACLU has claimed that our exercise of the CDC's Title 42 authority is not supported by the law, and we are working with the ACLU, actually adverse to the ACLU.
You're working with them, though?
If I may. Senator, we are adverse to the ACLU.
But you're working with them in this program? Is that why you canceled it?
If I may finish, Senator, we are adverse to the ACLU in litigation with respect to the legal authority underpinning our exercise of the CDC's Title 42 authority.
Right, but they had a role in terminating this. You're working with them in determination of these expulsion flights.
Senator, the decisions with respect to expulsion flights are ours because of the decisions that we have made based on the reasons that we think are necessary to execute on our mission.
Well, I think the fact that you're working with them is interesting news, so that's also quite relevant. We'll give you this information as a question for the record.
Senator, they're suing us and we're defendants. That's not what
I'm just quoting back what you just said. You just said that we're working with them. The news reports indicate that you've canceled these flights at their behest. You and I both know that there can be such a thing as friendly litigation, Mr. Secretary. I mean, let's not pretend otherwise. I'm just repeating your own words to you. We'll give this to you as a question for the record so that you can look into it more further. I think that's interesting news. Let me ask you about why you canceled the Safe Third agreements with the governments of El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. These are agreements negotiated by the previous administration that the president canceled once he came into office. The president says that he's an avowed multilateralist, and yet one of the first things he did was to tear up these international agreements with other countries. How can you address the root causes of migration, as you keep talking about, if you're going to tear up international agreements that try to address these problems?
So I will answer your question and make one comment before I do so. I've been a lawyer now for 35 or so years. Friendly litigation is a phenomenon with which I'm completely unfamiliar.
Really? You're not familiar, wait a minute. You're not familiar with an outside group bringing litigation against the government that the government then accedes to in order to change the law? You've never heard of that phenomenon?
Senator, I'm not familiar with friendly litigation. As a federal prosecutor, I was a strong advocate for the United States government in the pursuit of criminal accountability.
You've never heard wait, this is interesting, and you just brought it up. You've never heard of a regulatory lawsuits in which outside groups bring suits against the federal government. The government then agrees to settle the suit or to change its rules, and it reaches a settlement that is favored, that the government actually wants to achieve. You've never heard of that before?
Senator, I've heard of resolutions of litigation. I've heard of settlements of litigation. I've heard of arbitration. I've heard of mediation. Friendly litigation, the commencement of friendly litigation is something with which I'm unfamiliar. The reason why the safe third country agreements were terminated is because there was nothing safe about them.
I'm sorry, by which you mean what?
Senator, to have an individual fleeing persecution from Guatemala and considering Honduras a safe third country is actually empirically incorrect. Because, and we can take a look at the migration from Honduras and the number of people leaving Honduras for fear of persecution, and that is not our concept of a safe third country.
It's not your concept. So you think it's wise policy to come into office to terminate these international agreements based on your judgment about these other countries without consultation with them, apparently, and then we see this massive spike. Would you say that the children who have come to the United States and have gone through the border crossing, have had to do who knows what for the cartel, are more safe because of your actions? Do you think that you've put them in less danger because of the agreements that you terminated and the opportunities to seek asylum and then wait in a third country you've denied to them? Do you think that your actions have made the situation better?
Senator, you've gone over your time. But
Could I get an answer to that question?
Yes, oh, absolutely. So, Secretary, you may answer that question, but be respectful of our three other members that are waiting.
The safe third country agreements, in my opinion, put children in harm's way.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Austin.
Direct the Army Corps to clean up the school, that would direct testing of the entire school district and create in the Department of Energy a fund to clean up schools that are contaminated by Manhattan-era project contamination. Would you support that legislation? I would. Oh, good. I'm going to try to pass it next week, so I appreciate that. On a different subject here briefly, let me ask you about some disturbing ethics reports related to your department. This is from the Wall Street Journal. U.S. ethics officials in recent years have warned 1/3 of the Energy Department's senior officials own stock related to the agency's work. More than 130 officials in the Energy Department collectively reported about 2,700 trades of shares, bonds, and options in companies that ethics officers labeled as related to the agency's work. Do you own individual stocks, Madam Secretary?
No, I'm invested in mutual funds.
Good. So this report from CNBC last year that said that you violated stock disclosure law 9 times, that's not accurate?
I did fail to file a report in my first year that I thought was supposed to be filed at the end of the year and had to have been filed 3 months earlier. So I was late. That was a...
And this was, you don't own any individual stock now, so maybe you did when you first came and you converted them to mutual funds?
This was, yeah, it totally was the sale of what I had because I'm not owning individual stocks.
I understand. I don't own an individual stock either for the same reason. My question to you then is, do you think that other senior members of your department or any department in the executive branch should own individual stock? Why shouldn't we just ban that like we ought to ban it for members of Congress?
I leave it to Congress. I think it's easier when you don't own individual stocks. However, we do have disclosure rules and a very rigorous ethics agency inside of the Department of Energy. If somebody owns an individual stock and they work in the NNSA and that stock happens to relate to something over in the EERE and they're not involved in it at all, it's not considered an ethics violation.
What do you say about the report that 130 officials in the department collectively traded 2,700 shares of stock?
All of that has been vetted through
okay?
because they're not trading in areas where they have any influence or are touching.
But the report is that these are companies, for instance, 28 Energy Department officials own stock in Exxon, 17 officials own stock in Chevron, 15 hold stock in both.
And they may not be doing anything related to fossil fuel. It may just be part of their portfolio.
Boy, that looks
bad.
But
it doesn't involve or influence in any way our actions.
It doesn't influence their actions?
It
Owning the
absolutely
individual
does not.
stock doesn't? Then why did you sell yours?
Absolutely does not, because I signed an ethics agreement with the President of the United States saying I would divest.
Well, presumably because he was rightly worried that owning these individual stocks would influence your decisions, don't you think?
Well, it's different when you're the head of a department and you have a whole agency.
Versus
when
the
you're
regulator?
in one part of an agency and you trade a stock that happens to be dealing with a completely other part. We have 100,000 people in the department, a very vast agency, and they're strewn about the country. If somebody over in NNSA buys some stock over that in Exxon, it doesn't involve their particular area of influence, and that's the influence part, I think, that you're objecting to.
Well, so I guess I don't understand your position. Your position is you're not concerned about 130 officials in the Energy Department collectively trading 2,700 shares of stock, including in Chevron, Exxon, and others?
I would be concerned if our ethics office was concerned, but they have reviewed all of the investments and all of these disclosure agreements, and the people who are doing individual stock trading are not involved in any decision-making related to a stock that they purchased.
Well, I tell you what, I think I've got a solution, which is let's just ban it. Let's ban it for all executive department officials. Let's ban it for members of Congress. How about that?
I would not object to that.
I think that I am it. So you'll be happy to know, Madam Secretary, that we're grateful for you being here. Members will have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record, and the committee stands adjourned.
Great. Thank you.
Hawley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Garland, you said in our last exchange that it's your practice to defer to FBI agents in the field when it comes to investigations, apprehensions of subjects. I was interested, given your answer, to read in this morning's Washington Post that the FBI is saying that you overruled them when it came to raiding ex-President Trump's personal residence. Washington Post reports this morning, showdown before the raid, that senior FBI officials who would be in charge of leading the search resisted doing so as too combative, and proposed instead to seek Trump's permission to search his property. These field agents wanted to shutter the criminal investigation altogether in early June, the Post reports, but they were overruled by Maine DOJ. So I guess in light of your earlier testimony just this morning, my question is, how often do you overrule FBI field agents for political purposes?
I've skimmed that article. That's not an accurate reflection of what the article says, and I'm not able to comment on the investigation. My comment earlier was about tactics on the ground in particular cases.
Wait. You said it's not I'm reading to you from the article. Quote, senior FBI officials who would be in charge of leading the search resisted the plan as too combative and proposed instead to seek Trump's permission to seek his property, according to 4 people who spoke on condition of anonymity to describe a sensitive investigation, end quote.
Again, I have to say I'm not able to describe the investigation. I will say as a general matter and at a high level of generality, that in my experience, long experience as a prosecutor, there is often a robust discussion, and in the end, and it's encouraged among investigators and prosecutors.
Attorney General, my time is very
made.
Yes, and you made the decision.
I did. That's
right.
Not,
you said you did.
No, I'm sorry. What I said was I approved the decision.
So you didn't make the decision to raid?
I approve the decision to seek a search warrant after probable cause was found.
Overruling the FBI agents who did not want to do so. Did you talk about this with the White House
The
beforehand?
memorandum does not, that Washington Post article does not say what you're saying. I'm sorry. And I'm not able to describe this in any further
Well,
detail.
I think given that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just ask that this entire article be entered into the record.
Without objection.
And we can read for ourselves. I invite people to go and look. It says exactly that FBI field agents did not want to conduct the raid, and they were overruled by DOJ. So it doesn't seem to me, Attorney General, that the FBI has a lot of confidence in you, because what they're doing clearly is trying to distance themselves from your decisions. They're out there leaking left, right, and center and saying it wasn't us. We didn't want to do it. He made us do it. What's that say about their confidence in your leadership?
No, the previous senator said that they're leaking all in favor of the left. Now you're saying they're leaking all in favor of
I'm
the
asking
right.
you my question. Answer my question based on this evidence. Don't dissemble, Attorney
Time
General.
has expired.
Answer my question.
Time has expired. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Monaco, I want to come back to this extraordinary letter and memorandum that the Attorney General of the United States issued yesterday. Practically every day brings new reports about this administration weaponizing the federal bureaucracy to go after political opponents. Frankly, I don't think we've ever seen anything like it in American history. I mean, for those of us who missed the McCarthy era, I guess this president is intent on bringing it to us, but with new force and new power and new urgency, unlike anything we've ever seen. Are you aware of any time in American history when an attorney general has directed the FBI to begin to intervene in school board meetings, local school board meetings?
I'm not aware, and I'm not aware that is not going on. Let me be very,
Really,
very
this
clear.
isn't about local school board meetings? That's not the subject of the memorandum? I thought that was in the memorandum.
The memorandum is quite clear. It's one page, and it asks the U.S. attorney community and the FBI special agents in charge to convene state and local law enforcement partners to ensure that there's an open line of communication to address threats, to address violence, and that's the appropriate role of the Department of Justice to make sure that we are addressing criminal conduct and violence.
At local school board meetings, let me just ask you this. Is parents waiting sometimes for hours to speak at a local school board meeting to express concerns about critical race theory or the masking of their students, particularly young children? Is that in and of itself, is that harassment and intimidation? Is waiting to express one's view at a school board meeting harassment and intimidation?
As the Attorney General's memorandum made quite clear, spirited debate is welcome, is a hallmark of this country. It's something we all should engage in. And
No, I don't
be
think so,
free
Ms.
to
Monaco. With
engage
all
in.
due respect, it didn't make it quite clear. It doesn't define those terms, nor does it define harassment or intimidation. It talks about violence. I think we can agree that violence shouldn't be condoned or looked aside from in any way, swept under the rug at all. But harassment and intimidation, what do those terms mean in the context of a local school board meeting? I mean, this seems to, in the First Amendment context, we talk about the chill to speech. If this isn't a deliberate attempt to chill parents from showing up at school board meetings for their elected school boards, I don't know what is. I mean, I'm not aware of anything like this in American history. We're talking about the FBI. You're using the FBI to intervene in school board meetings. That's extraordinary.
Senator, I have to respectfully disagree. That is not what
Point me to an instance.
the Attorney General's memorandum made quite clear that violence is not appropriate. Spirited public debate on a whole range of issues is absolutely what this country is all about.
Then why is it being investigated by the FBI?
It is not. When and if any situation turns to violence, then that is the appropriate role of law enforcement to address it.
The memorandum covers more than violence. It talks about intimidation. It talks about harassment. So I'm asking you to draw some lines. We do this all the time in the First Amendment context. This is the sum and substance of First Amendment law. So I expect that you'll be available and willing to do it now. Tell me where the line is with parents expressing their concerns, waiting for hours in these school board meetings. We've all seen the videos. This happened in my state. Parents have waited for hours. Sometimes the school board meetings have been ended before they can speak because the school board doesn't want to hear it. And now parents are told that if they wait and they express their views that they may be investigated for intimidation?
I don't know who's telling them that, Senator. The job of the Justice Department is to investigate crimes. When a situation turns to violence, when and if a situation turns to violence, it's the job of the Justice Department and local law enforcement to address that. The Attorney General's memorandum simply asked the U.S. Attorney community, the FBI, and their counterparts to ensure that state and local law enforcement has an open line of communication to report threats, whether they happen in the context of election officials being threatened, whether they happen in the context of members of Congress being threatened, which the FBI responds to on a regular basis, as is appropriate. The job of the Justice Department is to address criminal conduct.
You know, all I can say is this is truly extraordinary. I think you know it is. It's unprecedented. You can't point to a single instance where anything like this has happened before. And I think parents across this country are going to be stunned to learn, stunned, that if they show up at a local school board meeting, by the way, where they have the right to appear and be heard, where they have the right to say something about their children's education, where they have the right to vote, and you are attempting to intimidate them. You are attempting to silence them. You are attempting to interfere with their rights as parents and, yes, with their rights as voters. This is wrong. This is dangerous. And I cannot believe that an Attorney General of the United States is engaging in this kind of conduct. And frankly, I can't believe that you are sitting here today defending it. I intend to get answers to these questions. You won't answer my questions. I'm going to get answers to these questions. Mr. Chairman, we need to have a hearing on this subject. We need to hear from the Attorney General himself. He needs to come here, take the oath, sit there, and answer questions. We have never seen anything like this before in our country's history. And frankly, I want to say I think it is a dangerous, dangerous precedent.
This hearing on Violence Against Women Act will continue. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the nominees for being here. Congratulations on your nomination. Justice Robinson, if I could just start with you, I have to say I'm troubled by your history of compelling individuals to express pro-abortion viewpoints against their religious convictions. I'm talking about the Regal Art Press case. I think Senator Cruz asked you a few questions about it. You represented Linda Paquette in 1994, who demanded that two devout Catholics print custom membership cards for an organization that advocated in favor of abortions. When they declined to do so, citing the teachings of their church, you and your client filed a complaint with the Vermont Human Rights Commission and then a lawsuit. And in your briefs, you argued that their decision not to print those materials was invidious, it was pernicious, and it was akin to racial discrimination, which is quite a claim. I mean, it's really quite a claim. And I have to ask you, why did you feel it was important to leverage the machinery of government? This is a private business. These are two private individuals. Why did you feel it was important to leverage the machinery of government to force these two Catholic business owners to violate their sincerely held religious convictions? Help me understand this.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. As I indicated with Senator Cruz, that case was 30 years ago, so I apologize if I'm not as precise about all the details, but I can tell you, generally speaking, that we conceded that if the printers had declined to print the materials on account of their opposition to abortion, that there was no basis in law to pursue our claim. The issue, the threshold issue in the case is whether that in fact was the facts. My client was a Catholic. She was there to get flyers for Vermont Catholics for Choice printed. She was deeply offended by the suggestion that she wasn't a true Catholic, and that was the reason why the printer wouldn't print the materials. The case never proceeded beyond that stage. We went up to the Supreme Court on what I would call a procedural issue. We went back down, and the case settled, and that was the end of it.
Well, I can understand the issue if the government had told your client that she wasn't a true Catholic or a true Hindu or true whatever, given our First Amendment. But we're talking here about a suit against two private individuals, husband and wife, I believe, Malcolm and Susan Baker, who on the basis of their religious viewpoints said that they couldn't print these cards. And you and your client attempted to leverage the machinery of the state. In fact, you were the ones trying to use the machinery of the state to compel these two private individuals to speak. Now, of course, the Supreme Court has addressed this fact pattern in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case since that time, which concerned compelled speech. In light of Masterpiece Cake Shop, do you acknowledge today that your client would not have the right to compel other individuals to speak in a way that she favors?
Senator Hawley, I don't read the Masterpiece Cake decision as altering the Smith holding that neutral laws of general applicability apply without regard to a free exercise defense, nor do I understand the court to have resolved the speech claim. As I read the Masterpiece Cake decision, it turned on the fact that the court concluded that the process in the Colorado Civil Rights Commission evinced hostility toward religion, and it wasn't, in fact, a neutral law of general applicability in that respect.
So I think this is an important point. So what you're telling me is your view or understanding of the law is that the law can, in fact, compel people of religious faith to speak against their own faith and their own viewpoint. The law can do that. And if it's labeled as neutral, but it just so happens that it compels religious believers to violate their sincerely held religious beliefs, that's okay under the First Amendment. Is that correct? Is your understanding of the law as it currently exists?
No, Senator Hawley, I'm not aware that the U.S. Supreme Court has addressed the nuance of a free exercise claim coupled with a free speech claim, which is what you just described. What I referenced earlier was a straight-up free exercise claim, and I think that the U.S. Supreme Court hasn't backed away from Justice Scalia's decision in the Smith case in terms of the applicable law.
So you stand by your representation of this client and all of the arguments that you made, including calling the position of these two Catholics, Malcolm and Susan Baker, invidious, pernicious, and akin to racial discrimination? Do you regret any of that rhetoric?
Senator, I don't remember the context. I haven't looked at that brief in 30 years.
So does the passage of time make it any different? I'll give this to you for the record, and that'll allow you to refresh your memory, but I'm quoting you, invidious, pernicious, akin to racial discrimination. As you sit here, does that not trouble you? You're describing the religious beliefs of practicing Catholics who are citing the teachings of their church. You think that's akin to the Ku Klux Klan?
Senator, the threshold question in the case, which I suspect I will find is what we were addressing in that passage, was whether or not this was discrimination against my client on the basis of her religion.
And you were saying that these two Catholics who did not want to provide the speech, you engage in the speech your client wanted them to on the basis of their faith, doing so was akin to religious discrimination. Listen, I have to tell you, the last president sent somebody up here to this committee who made that exact argument. It's a Republican who made that exact argument. I voted no. That person didn't get confirmed. I've got profound concerns, Justice Robinson, about your position here. And I have to tell you, the passage of time doesn't do anything to alleviate my concerns. One more question, Mr. Chairman, if I might. Let's shift to criminal law. The Kazawaski case, can you help me understand this case? September term 2017, this is a defendant who was living with his girlfriend and her 6-year-old daughter. The defendant was using box cutters to open boxes. The 6-year-old asks him what he was doing. The defendant held a box cutter to the girl's stomach, told her he would kill her in her sleep, then laughed as the girl ran away. The girl later told her father about the incident, said she was unable to sleep, understandably. This same defendant later convicted of aggravated domestic assault with a deadly weapon. You dissented, saying he shouldn't have been convicted, and you wrote, in part because the blade was covered with plastic, it shouldn't have been considered a real threat, and you went so far as to analogize this to a pillow fight. I've got the case right here. You said this threat in this case is akin to the threat to use a pillow to swat somebody's backside. I have to tell you, this completely baffles me. The threat of a box cutter to a 6-year-old stomach, and the guy says he's going to kill her, and that's akin to swatting her with a pillow. What am I missing here?
Thank you, Senator. I think if the picture in your mind is the box cutter that we use to open boxes in our garage, I would understand your perception of that.
The picture is the one that is in the record because it's in the case. I can see it. It's right here. It's right here. It's a box cutter. There's a blade.
Yeah.
He put that to her stomach.
The blade was completely covered, Senator, and the question of law.
He threatened to kill her.
The question of law, well, there were two questions. One was the record and what the record showed, and I understand your description of what you understand the record to have showed. I'd have to go back and look more broadly. But the legal question is whether the definition of deadly weapon in Vermont law was satisfied by that implement. The fact that an implement may be used in a deadly way doesn't make it, by definition, a deadly weapon. And so the question involved the very specific nature of that box cutter and the way he used it.
Well, all I can say is I find your position in this case frightening. And the idea, as the father of 3 young children, the idea that somebody puts a box cutter to a young girl's stomach and says he's going to kill her in her sleep, and that's not an issue, frankly, I think that's crazy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Durbin has gone to vote. I will go shortly, but that concludes our first panel. We thank both of you for your excellent testimony this morning, and congratulations again to you and your families.
Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Director Ray, let me start with you if I could. I think the last time that I got to visit with you was back in August 4th of this year. You were at the Senate Judiciary Committee. You remember that, I assume. We had to cut that hearing short. We were supposed to do 2 rounds of questions. You said you had to be somewhere, so we cut it short. Republicans were not able to ask a second round as we had been informed we would. The press reported shortly thereafter that the reason that the hearing had to be cut short is because you were flying on a Gulfstream jet for a personal vacation in the Adirondacks. Please tell me that's not accurate.
Senator, the hearing was not cut short from my experience. We had agreed beforehand on the time and length of it. And I was very surprised to find that anyone on the committee was surprised. As to how I fly, I am required, not only permitted, but required to fly on an FBI plane wherever I go. That's
so you were going on vacation?
I was, yes.
So you left a statutorily required oversight hearing in order to go on a personal vacation in the Adirondacks?
I took a flight to go visit my family, as had been previously arranged in conjunction with the leadership of the committee.
The ranking member, Chuck Grassley, asked you during the hearing, he said, I assume you must have other business. You said, yes. He then said, if you have a business trip, you've got your own plane, can't it wait a while? He then said, Chuck Grassley, we only just heard half an hour ago that now you have to leave. We were going to have a 7-minute round followed by a 3-minute round. I've got 7 people on my side of the aisle, that included me, who are waiting for this additional round. Is there any reason we can't accommodate them for 21 minutes? And you said you had a plane to catch. You had somewhere to go. And now we find out it was for vacation?
The reference to other business was not a reference to that day. It was a reference to the following week where Senator Grassley and I were going to see each other in Iowa when I had other business in Iowa, and I did, in fact, see him then.
So wait, you had to leave the hearing early because you're going to see him later in Iowa in a week?
No, I had to leave when I said I was going to have to leave, as had been previously organized with the leadership of the committee.
You left an oversight hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee required by statute so you could vacation with your family. I find that absolutely unbelievable and, frankly, indefensible. Now, is it your practice to use government planes? You say you do this all the time. You flew in a Gulfstream 550, I think, that was originally purchased for counterterrorism purposes. You were using it to go to, what is it, Saranac Lake? Is that how I say it? I've never been there. Is that the right pronunciation? Saranac Lake? That was your destination?
Yes.
So, did you enjoy the flight? I mean, did you pay for it?
Yes, I paid for it.
Will you turn over all receipts and reimbursement to this committee?
Senator, we will be happy to comply with oversight requests related to the use of the plane, as I said, and it's important for people to understand.
Why don't you just give me a yes? Will you turn over the receipts for your flight?
I will turn over the information related to my use of the plane. The use of the plane, I am required, not just permitted, required, even for personal travel, to use the FBI plane.
How convenient for you.
And I pay every single time that I use the plane for personal use.
I'm glad it's available for you to jet away from your statutorily required hearings and oversight before this Congress, where you denied the ability of members of Congress to ask you questions because you had to go on a personal vacation using a government plane. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here, Mr. Madrid. But before I start, I do want to come back to, I'm flummoxed by your exchange with Senator Paul. I can't understand your position on this. Why is it that you think that taxpayers shouldn't be able to have an accounting of how you're spending money?
Senator Hawley, great to see you. We do believe in accountability and transparency.
But that's not my question. My question is, why don't you think they should be able to see how you're spending the money, that it's their money, not your money? And I just don't understand. Why is it you think they shouldn't receive an accounting of how your office is spending the money, of how SBA is spending its money? What's the must be some philosophical objection here. I just don't understand what it is.
You should be able to see everything that we report and through our public reporting. So we do believe in accountability and transparency.
Oh, so you do think then that the public should be able to see what you spend and what you do. Is that right?
I'm replying in terms of our footprint at OED and our public reporting on our resource partners. And
So, okay, I got it. So the locus of your disagreement with Senator Paul is you just don't want to answer the questions he asked you. That's the real answer. Is that
Senator,
right?
thank you for your question. I'm here to, report on the Office of Entrepreneurial Development, my purview, and so that's what I'll continue to do.
Yeah, the reason I think it's so irritating, frankly, is because this administration and this SBA has repeatedly and consistently stonewalled this committee, and in particular the Republicans on this committee, for going on a solid year now. It's really extraordinary. So to have you come in here and say that you don't think that you ought to have to give an accounting for taxpayer money is really extraordinary. So I just want the record to reflect that I completely agree with Senator Paul and Senator Ernst that your position on this administration's position on this is just really, frankly, unbelievable. And I'm startled that you're taking the positions you are. Let me ask you about some other accountability. For this fiscal year 22, I should say, SBA submitted budget justifications that request funding increases for most of the programs and initiatives that we're here to discuss. I want to know about some of the data, however, that's been published about how effective these various programs are. For example, small business development centers, according to data collected by the SBA's Office of Entrepreneurial Development in their annual studies from 2003 to 2012, only 20% of program participants reported that the services they received enabled them to retain current staff. Only 16% reported that services received enabled them to hire new staff, and only 29% of participants said that the services they received had a positive impact on their profit margin. So let me just ask you, Mr. Madrid, does the Office of Entrepreneurial Development continue to conduct annual studies of program participants to assess the impact and effectiveness of these programs?
We report on our outcomes and our goals, and that is standard per the statute. So we report on the metrics and the goals annually, and those are.
But do you do studies? But do you do studies to assess the impact of the programs? I mean, we know that SBA did from 2003 to 2012. My staff hasn't been able to find any reports published, I think, past 2012. So this is just a factual question. Do you conduct annual studies of your program participants to assess the impact, or no?
Senator, we issue public reports, so we'd be happy to work with your office on the data that we do have and the reporting that we do have.
But do you conduct annual studies of program participants? That's my question.
We report on the data that's aggregated from our resource partners.
So that's a yes, or that's a no?
We can report on the.
When was the last time you published an annual study?
We can work with your office to give you our reporting that we have on our.
Well, when was the last time you published an annual? I'm just trying. These are not gotcha questions. I'm just trying to establish some basic questions, some basic facts, so I can ask you some questions about them. So either you're not prepared or you're not here to answer my questions, which goes back to what we talked about earlier. So let's try again. When was the last time you published an annual report? You can read the memo your staff keeps giving. Maybe we should have the staffer come testify. He seems to be the one who's giving you the answers. We could probably make room at the table. If somebody's willing to answer questions, I'd love to hear from them. Go ahead.
Senator, thank you for your question. We report publicly, annually, on the metrics that are per the statute. We'd be happy to work with your office to supply them, the most recent ones.
Okay, so those are, you survey the participants of the program annually?
This is the data that we receive through our resource partners, like Capital Infusion, unique clients served, et cetera. We'd be happy to work with your office.
Have the performance metrics that you've seen, have they improved since the publication of the 2013 report?
I'm sorry? Have
the performance metrics that you've seen, you say that you collect performance metrics.
Yes, they have. there's some of the metrics that have improved, and I would be happy to supply them.
Give them to me. I mean, in 2012, only 20% of program participants said that the services they received helped them retain current staff. So what's the number now?
I can give you what we do have in terms of the capital infusion, and I'd be happy to work with your office.
Okay. I wish I could say this was productive, but it's manifestly not. And I don't know what to say, Mr. Chairman, other than that we'll give you a bunch of questions for the record. But if we're going to have these hearings and be able to do any kind of oversight, you're going to have to prepare, and you're going to have to come prepared to answer questions. And what this performance today, frankly, is just ridiculous. Thank you, Mr.
Let me just reinforce a couple comments that have been made. First, every member of this committee is entitled to as much information as we can get for oversight. We do believe in transparency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both of the witnesses for being here. Administrator Ruby, let me start with you. As you know, we're very proud in the state of Missouri of the work that's done at the Kansas City National Security Campus to support the nation's nuclear enterprise. I just wonder if you can give me an update on the NNSA's efforts to ensure that the Kansas City campus has the capacity it's going to need, the additional capacity it's going to need to meet production requirements in the coming years.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. We're also very proud of the Kansas City National Security Campus. And I'm pleased to report we're making good progress on expanding capacity and moving towards the purchase of facilities and land that could help us in the future make sure that we're right-sized at Kansas City.
Good, very good. Secretary Granholm, today in the state of Missouri, the average price of gasoline today, as of this morning, is $4.10. Average price of diesel is $5.18. And I'm sure you've seen the reporting this morning that now AAA is projecting that gas prices will hit a national average of $6 a gallon by the month of August. Is this acceptable to you?
No, it is not. And you can thank the activity of Vladimir Putin for invading Ukraine and pulling essentially those barrels.
With all due respect, Madam Secretary, that's utter nonsense. In January of 2021, the average gas price in my state was $2.07. 8 months later, long before Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, that price was up over 30%, and it has been going up consistently since. What are you doing to reverse this administration's policies that are drawing down our own supply of energy in this country, that are throttling oil and gas production in the United States of America? What are you doing about it?
With respect, sir, it is not administration policies that have affected supply and demand.
How can you say that when the price of gas was up over 30% from January to... you answer my questions, and it's my time, Madam Secretary, so why don't you answer my question? From January to August, the price of gasoline was up over 30%. In my state alone, it has been a continuous upward tick since then. And here's what your president did when he first came to office. He immediately re-entered the Paris Climate Accord. He canceled the Keystone Pipeline. He halted leasing programs in ANWR. He issued a 60-day halt on all new oil and gas leases and drilling permits on federal lands and waters. That's nationwide. That accounts, by the way, for 25% of U.S. oil production. He directed federal agencies to eliminate all supports for fossil fuels. He imposed new regulations on oil and gas and methane emissions. Those were all just in the first few days. Are you telling me that's had no effect on our energy supply?
94% of the oil and gas executives that were surveyed by the Dallas Fed said that administration policies had nothing to do with the increase in the price of oil.
I'm not interested in opinions of these people. I'm interested in the facts. Are you telling me that these policies had no effect? Is that your testimony that these policies had no effect? Are you telling me, Madam Secretary, are you telling me under oath that these policies had no effect?
I'm telling you that 94% of the oil and gas industry.
I'm not interested in their
executives say
opinion.
that
I'm
they had
interested in the
no effect.
facts.
So, no, they did not. Ask
That is
Vladimir
a remarkable statement.
about the increase in demand and the decrease in supply from pulling Russian barrels of oil off the market, thanks to rightly the United States saying we're not going to take Russian oil. Coming out of COVID.
So what explains the increase between January and August of 2021?
Coming out of COVID, there was an increase in demand because people were driving again. When there was no demand, the prices dropped. That is a basic law of economics. The prices dropped.
I have to say, Madam Secretary, with all due respect, your answers are insulting. And they are insulting to the people of Missouri who are looking for action. Now, you said 2 months ago your department was on war footing. What are you doing to bring down the price of gasoline, which has been going up consistently since you took office?
The price of gasoline is derived from the price of oil. The price of oil is at $110 a barrel.
What are you doing to decrease it?
On
is
a
my
global
question.
market, sir. If you could let me finish.
If you would answer my question.
I am answering your question, sir. Oil is traded on a global market. We are paying extremely high prices today, just as they are in Japan.
What are you doing to get it down?
Just as they are in Germany. Just as they are in South Africa.
What are you doing to get it down?
We are calling for an increase in supply. We are releasing 1 million barrels a day from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to try to balance out.
Who are you getting it calling for an increase in supply from?
It is the largest tool that we have to be able to do that.
Who are you calling for an increase in supply from?
Excuse me.
Secretary, please.
Senator Hawley, your time's expired.
Could I get an answer to this question, Mr. Chairman?
Senator,
Who are you calling for an increase in supply from?
From our domestic oil and gas manufacturers, from international oil and
Even
gas
as you
manufacturers.
cancel their leases?
Senator Hawley, if you want to answer, you have to allow the Secretary to answer.
I've said we have called repeatedly for increases in supply from domestic oil and gas manufacturers, from international oil and gas manufacturers. We want to increase supply, and that is why the President released an unprecedented amount from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and our international allies also released from their reserves to try to balance out supply and demand while the oil and gas companies increase supply. And the the Energy Information Administration has projected that they will have increased in the United States about 1 million barrels a day by the end of this year.
Thank you very much. Senator King, please. Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator King, please.
Just for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees, and thanks for being here. Ms. Abudu, if I could just start with you. You said to Senator Ossoff just a couple of minutes ago that you believe in the First Amendment, right?
Absolutely.
And you told him that you have litigated cases under the various clauses of the First Amendment, and you said that you think that free speech is essential. Is that right?
That is correct.
And freedom of thought is essential, you also said. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What about the right to counsel? Is that also essential?
The Sixth Amendment and the Supreme Court have said so.
So what would you think about your organization calling other members of the bar, saying that it is their goal, your organization's goal, to destroy other members of the bar who provide litigation, who provide counsel to indigent defendants? I'm thinking particularly of the Alliance Defending Freedom. Back in 2007, a senior fellow at your organization said in a speech that, "I want to say plainly, our aim in life is to destroy these groups," referring to the Alliance Defending Freedom and others. Just to be clear, these are groups that provide representation to indigent defendants and to other defendants, other plaintiffs, counsel, litigants. I want to say plainly that our aim in life is to destroy these groups, to completely destroy them. To completely destroy them. Do you think that's appropriate rhetoric for someone to use about opposing counsel or a member of the bar? Do you think that's an appropriate goal to have?
Senator, I would first say that I'm not familiar even with the language that you just cited, but I will say that my work, again, and I stand on my record, is to ensure that all people have access to counsel to vindicate their rights.
Do you think that this is appropriate rhetoric from a senior fellow at your organization?
Senator, again, not having that language in front of me, not understanding the context, I can't even respond to that.
Oh, you can't say it's inappropriate?
Without more information, without
Really?
context, and without seeing it.
That's interesting. Now, you said to this committee repeatedly that all you do at the Southern Poverty Law Center is voting rights. That's not what you said in your questionnaire to the committee, though. You said that you oversee litigation related to hate groups. So let's talk a little bit more about hate groups. which apparently you oversee the litigation for. Is it your position that organizations like the Alliance Defending Freedom are a hate group?
Senator, I would want to review that language because in
Which,
terms
I'm sorry,
of
which language?
regarding the overseeing the organization's research and profiling of hate groups, I don't work in that part of the.
Let me just quote for you. Further, as the Director for Strategic Litigation, I've taken on significant managerial responsibilities, including overseeing all of the organization's legal programmatic work, which in addition to voting rights, includes immigrants' rights, criminal justice reform, children's rights, LGBTQ rights, and litigation related to hate groups.
Thank you for clarifying that it was our legal program.
Right.
And in terms of the cases that the organization has brought, it does include representing individuals who have been targeted on the internet, who have been harassed, whose family has been stalked in terms of, or because of their identity. In the one particular case, because of our client's identity as a member of the Jewish community. And we represented that woman successfully.
Yeah, but you say you oversee litigation related to hate groups. Your organization is infamous for designating anyone who disagrees with it as a hate group, trying to drive them from public life, and in the words of your own employees, trying to completely destroy them. Is that a record that you're proud of?
I am proud of our representation of that woman in that case who simply because of her Jewish heritage was targeted and stalked.
That's not what we're talking about. Let me ask you about the Southern Poverty Law Center more generally. What year did you join SPLC?
February 2021. I'm sorry, 2019.
2019. 2019 was the year that the SPLC paid $3.4 million in response to defamation lawsuits. 2019 was the year that Charity Watch gave your organization an F rating. The SPLC has been labeled by the left-wing policy journal Current Affairs as an outright fraud that uses willful deception designed to scare liberals into writing checks. The progressive journalist Alexander Cockburn said this about SPLC: I regard it, the Southern Poverty Law Center, collectively as one of the greatest frauds in American life. Liberal death penalty abolitionist Stephen Bright refused to accept an award named after the founder of the SPLC, saying in his words, the SPLC has long been run by a con man and a fraud. That's from a Harper's Magazine article. Also in 2019, SPLC employees told the press we were part of a con and we knew it. That's in a New Yorker article, not exactly a right-wing journal. Are you concerned by any of this record of the organization that you work for?
Senator, what I'm glad that I didn't hear in that litany is a complaint about the voting rights work that we've done, about the clients and the community.
Are you concerned that Charity Watch gave you an F, that you had to pay $3.4 million in response to defamation lawsuits, that you've been criticized, your organization's been criticized as a fraud and a con job, and that you work for an organization who says it's their goal in life to completely destroy their opponents? None of that gives you any pause.
Senator, again, my work with the Southern Poverty Law Center has been to uphold the constitutional rights of individuals who, without pro bono counsel, would not be even able to have access to justice.
I have to tell you, I find your answers absolutely extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. I can't believe you've been nominated for this position. I can't believe that the President of the United States would nominate someone from this organization with this record. And I can't believe that you would sit here today and refuse to condemn this hateful, frankly, violent rhetoric from this organization with this record. It's astounding to me.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello again to both.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to all the nominees. Ms. Hodge, I want to ask you about an article that you wrote for Bloomberg about affirmative action in universities. You argued that opposition to race-based affirmative action, I'm going to quote you now, is rooted in part in the belief that racism and systems that imposed barriers based on race in American society no longer exist, end quote. I've been under the impression that the argument was actually the opposite, that race-based affirmative action imposes race-based barriers on particular racial groups. Now, your article was about the Harvard case, so I take it you're familiar with that case. Is that fair to say?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Yes, I was writing an article following the decision that was made by the First Circuit in that particular piece of Bloomberg.
Gotcha. So the court documents, court filings from that case, from the Harvard case, state that, quoting now, Asian Americans needed SAT scores that were 140 points higher than white students, all other quantifiable variables being equal, to get into these elite schools. The same court filings also show that Asian American students who had the same score as African American students were about 25% likely to get into Harvard, whereas the African American student was 95% likely to get into Harvard. So basically, what the documents show is, and I don't know if there's much dispute about this, that Asian Americans are systemically discriminated against with these race-based policies. That's a problem, don't you think?
Senator, I will say, and thank you for the question, I'm not intimately familiar with the entirety of the report or all of the information that's contained in it. I know it is cited in the case. However, I would say that with the case that was before the court and currently now is on certiorari and coming before the Supreme Court, that the issue of race as a factor in admissions and utilized in universities is obviously what's going to be contemplated by the court, and understanding that the strict scrutiny standard is applicable. It would be a determination as to whether or not there's a compelling governmental interest, and if it's narrowly tailored to afford that interest for all who are asserting the argument.
Yeah, but is it a problem? I guess my question is it a problem for universities to make it harder for members of a certain race to be admitted to their university, to do it deliberately? Is that a problem? That's what your article's about. I'm asking. You've expressed an opinion on this, so I'm just asking about your opinion. Don't you think that's a problem?
Senator, thank you for the question. The article was written in the context of really providing, in essence, a procedural roadmap of what had transpired.
Yeah, but you expressed, though, I'm sorry to interrupt you, it's just I've got so little time and I have the article in front of me. I enjoyed reading it. But you express your personal views, which is fine, by the way. I'm just asking about them. Your personal views on this case, and you say that the arguments of those who are arguing against Harvard's policies are actually anti-diversity. You say that they fail to overcome a principle that's of paramount importance to the country. I'm quoting you now: diversity matters, and its value is immeasurable, especially in education. I'm just asking you whether or not having Asian Americans present and able to be admitted on a fair basis with members of other racial groups, if that isn't in fact an interest that serves diversity. I mean, don't you think that that's important?
Senator Hawley, to your question, and thank you again for it, what has been stated by the court through years of dialogue and deliberation over this specific issue of affirmative action is that diversity matters.
And does that include for Asian Americans?
For everyone.
And that's your personal opinion, too?
I'm stating based upon how the court has, I'm not putting my personal opinion. I believe that if I'm so fortunate to be confirmed to the district court, that my personal opinion would have no role in the deliberations that I would conduct. I would base all of my decisions on the facts presented, the arguments presented by counsel and or the individual litigants, as well as the law, and apply the law and precedent to whatever's presented to me.
But surely you could agree with the statement at this level of generality that deliberate discrimination against Asian Americans is wrong. Is that fair to say?
Senator Hawley, I say that discrimination is prohibited, and people who are discriminated against under the law, obviously the work I also do in terms of employment discrimination, if someone is discriminated against based on a protected category, that is something that that's protected against under the Constitution.
But it's not wrong. I mean, you can't just say it's wrong. I'm trying to understand why you're splitting the hairs the way you're splitting them.
Senator, I'm not splitting hairs. Discrimination is illegal.
But my question to you is, discrimination against Asian Americans is wrong, yes?
Discrimination against anyone is wrong, yes.
Judge Perez, let me...
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Secretary Holland, if I could just start with you. I want to ask you about this memo from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management that leaked a few weeks ago that suggests that your department, I'm looking at the memo now, that suggests that your department has been prioritizing a climate change agenda over energy security in this country. And I just want to get to the bottom of this and see if this is true. The memo concerns Lease Sale 258 in Alaska, the Cook Inlet project. And I just want to quote from the memo, which I have in front of me. If the Cook Inlet prospect would be developed, there would be additional government revenues and greater energy security for the state of Alaska. The memo goes on. Nevertheless, it's quite a transition. Nevertheless, because of the challenges facing the nation from climate change, BOEM is not, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is not recommending this option. And what the memo says is that the government ought to charge 18.75% in royalties, the maximum take allowed under the law, instead of a lower rate that would actually lead to more development. Now, did you agree with this analysis?
Senator, thank you for the question. And of course, royalty rates are such that because our public lands belong to every single American, that Americans should get a fair return on the land that that is used for this purpose.
But did you agree with charging the highest possible rate in order to discourage bids on the project because of climate change?
There is, the royalty rates are, I mean, that's not a surprise. That royalty rate is evident in other parts of the country. And I will say that with respect to our Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, that is her department, that is her bureau, and I honestly, she takes care of that. She took care of that issue.
Well, but you're the secretary, so presumably you understand what's going on in your department. This is an extraordinary memo, and I just want to make sure that I understand what your position is. The memo says that a lower rate, the 16.67 rate to be precise, would have offered greater energy security. That's a quote from the memo. I have it. This is in public. Anybody can read this. Mm-hmm. That would have offered greater energy security. But your department recommended a significantly higher rate that you thought would likely lead perhaps to not developing, not moving forward with the project for the purpose of climate change. You didn't want this to go forward. You didn't want Alaska to have greater energy security because you said climate change. I'm just trying to understand, do you agree with that analysis? And you did indeed impose the higher rate. In fact, the lease sale 258 earned just one bid. So it looked like the strategy worked. I just want to know, do you agree with that we should trade off energy security for this country in favor of a climate change agenda?
Senator, what I can tell you is that the royalty rate for the leases was the most reasonable balance of environmental and economic factors for the public and was consistent with the IRA requirements. Additionally, of course, yes, we are in the midst of a terrible climate crisis, and it's our job to balance those things, to create a balance on our public lands, because our public lands belong to every single American.
Okay, that sounds like a yes to me. So you're telling me, yes, you think that charging more and trading off energy security, sacrificing energy security in favor of the climate change agenda is the right trade-off.
Senator, this royalty rate was consistent with the IRA requirement.
Well, yeah, it's the highest. It's consistent in the sense that you couldn't charge more than that. I mean, the memo lays this out. You selected the highest possible tax, essentially, in order to discourage development, and you succeeded in it. What's amazing is the memo, and listen, kudos to the person who wrote the memo, because they're very honest. They say we could have energy security or we could have the climate change agenda. Energy security needs to be sacrificed. Let's go with climate change. And you're telling me that you agree with that. I just have to say, I think that is a disastrous trade-off, and I can't improve upon the comments offered by one senator who said, I'm appalled by the contents of this memo, which make crystal clear that this administration is literally putting their radical climate change agenda ahead of the needs of the people of Alaska and the United States. That was the chairman. Mm-hmm. He was absolutely right about that. Well said, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to register that I think that this decision to sacrifice our energy independence and energy security in favor of an agenda that is making us dependent on China, that is making us dependent on OPEC, that is making us dependent on every dictator around the world is a disastrous choice for the working people of this country. My time's expired. I have some more questions, but I'll give them to you for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If not, the question on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The resolution is agreed to. Concludes the business meeting. We'll go now resume our hearing and back to Senator Hawley. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, there we go. Just waiting for my time to be reset. All right, Mr. Kumar, back to you. We were talking about transformers, and I was about to ask you if you know what percentage of the U.S. electric grid contains components that are manufactured in China.
You're getting that, David.
Senator Hawley, thank you for the question, and appreciate your recognition that we really need to be focused on the China threat when it comes to the grid equipment, both hardware and software that is deployed across the United States. Where we have been really focused on is 4 different areas here. One is we need to understand what are those critical components that, if disrupted, could have a debilitating impact on the United States. The second area where we're focused on is establishing provenance. So really understanding what's in this equipment, what's in the subcomponent level, and what pieces are potentially from an adversarial nation like a China. The second area where a third area where we're focused is testing. So we're testing some of this equipment down to the chip level and down to the software level in partnership with the DOE National Laboratories. And then finally, we're getting education and awareness out to the sector. That's where our focus of our effort is right now, and we're doing some of that analysis currently, and we're happy to brief you on some of that work.
So does that mean you don't know? You don't know what percentage of the grid contains components manufactured in China?
So, sir, there's a number of components that are built. The hard part about some of these questions is, at the top level, it could be, it looks like an American manufacturer or a friendly country.
That's why I'm asking
The reality is, when you go down to the subcomponent level, is where it gets a lot harder. So our focus is really looking at all of that equipment, and we're now doing that analysis right now to see what pieces of equipment have some of these concerning areas. Now, the
okay, wait. So I'm sorry, my time is limited here, but I just want. So you don't. It sounds like you don't know. When do you think you might know? You say you're doing the analysis. When will it be done, and when will we find out?
Sir, we are doing a broad analysis on what are the critical components in the sector, and what do we need to be prioritizing when it comes to some of our testing. And we're taking a risk-based approach. The reality is...
But when will you know? When will you know what you... so, I didn't think this would be very hard. I asked you what percentage of the grid contains components manufactured in China. You don't know, but you say you're looking at it. I just want to know when you're going to be done. When are we going to know?
So, sir, it's a complex question. As you know, the grid is it has thousands of hardware and
date.
software.
I'm looking for a date. I'm looking for a date. You're exhausting my patience now. When are you going to be done with the analysis?
Sure, I think the one thing we have to remember is when you have an analysis like this, China may not just choose to exploit equipment they're developing. They may choose to exploit equipment that is developed by someone else if it has a vulnerability.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm on the Senate floor. This is like a filibuster. Okay, I'll give this to you for the record. Let me try something else. What percentage of large power transformers are manufactured in China? Do you know that?
So currently, that number is not as high. We're doing
well, wait a minute. You just told me a second ago you don't have any idea what the number is. So when you say it's not as high, what are we even talking about here?
The United States is not purchasing as many large power transformers as it was back in the day.
Back in the day? What does that even mean?
So what I find is a lot of the utilities themselves recognize the China risk, and they themselves are not purchasing these large power transformers.
Well, what percentage are manufactured in China of our large power transformers? Do you know? It's fine if you don't know. I'm just trying to get answers here. You just say, I don't know, and then I'm going to ask you when you're going to know.
I'm happy to get back with you on that answer, sir.
Okay. Okay, I find this really quite baffling. This leads me to ask why it is that this administration suspended the last administration's executive order that restricted the procurement of foreign electric equipment. That was Executive Order 13920. Why did they? I mean, why allow procurement of foreign electric equipment that can be so dangerous to the grid? Do you know why this happened?
So, sir, right now what the focus is, we have to take a holistic view of supply chain security. Just having an approved and unapproved list is not the only way to secure our supply chains.
Well, but that may be true. I'm just wondering that why would we allow China, a country that's suspected of numerous cyber attacks against us, supply major components for our electrical grid? I mean, is that a smart thing to do?
So, again, what we're taking is a more strategic approach to this, to look at all of those different pieces I just mentioned, to ensure we look at security from all different aspects, including security by design, is a key component of how we need to tackle this problem. It's too large of a problem to start to have one solution, which was the solution in that executive order. Now, that executive order is under review. I defer to the White House in terms of a replacement executive order, but know that this is an area that's a priority for us at the department to ensure that supply chain is secure, and we're doing that very actively.
Well, all right, my time's expired, and there's lots of my colleagues who want to ask questions. I'm going to give these questions to you again for the record. I'd like to know what percentage of the grid contains components manufactured in China. And if you don't know, that's fine. I'd like to know when you're going to have your analysis done. I'd like to know what percentage of large power transformers are manufactured in China. And I just humbly submit to you that allowing China, getting procurement of electric equipment made in China and allowing it to be integrated into our grid is a bad idea. And I'm baffled as to why this administration is allowing it to go forward. I'll probably have some more questions for you for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And Mr. Kumar, I think it's fair to say that we would all like to see what our dependency is on China's supply chain, because we're trying to break that immediately, if not quicker. Thank you. With that, we have now Senator Hickenlooper.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Ranking Member. Thank all of you for taking the time and being with us. Let me start with Mr. Lee. I was intrigued by your suggestion of how we could help infrastructure asset owners and operators. You suggested that the U.S.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. We have Senator Hawley, Booker, and Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Coe, congratulations on your nomination. Let me just ask you a baseline question about the free exercise clause in the United States Constitution. Is it limited to houses of worship? Is it limited to the physical space of a house of worship?
No, it is not.
So I'm struggling to understand your opinion in the Tandon case. I don't understand why you would think that businesses should be able to abide or should be able to be open and people should not be able to gather to worship in their own homes. Why would you assume that people gathering in their own homes wouldn't follow the guidelines, wouldn't obey the restrictions, and therefore couldn't be trusted? Help me understand that assumption. I don't quite get it.
On my part, it wasn't an assumption. That was the scientific evidence and the only evidence on that issue that was presented in the record.
Wait, it was scientific evidence that people of faith don't follow rules?
No, but that the risk of transmission is greater inside a private home than in a commercial entity that is regulated, that can be subject to criminal penalties. I recognize...
Wait a minute.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but your opinion says, under the state's restrictions, commercial environments require masking and social distancing, a requirement that can be enforced by commercial workers. On the other hand, at plaintiffs' gatherings, it is uncertain whether participants in these gatherings would maintain social distancing.
My order also mentioned that there are criminal penalties for not complying with the restrictions on commercial entities.
Right, so you assume that because of those, that commercial businesses will comply, but you assume religious believers would not comply. I'm just trying to understand why you disfavor religious believers in this way that seems very personal.
All I can say, Senator Hawley, is that I certainly have no animus toward any person of faith.
You think maybe you have an implicit bias? Let me ask you this.
No, but
in the 2020 Women's Collective Summit, you said last year that stereotypes are deeply embedded in many people. I'm quoting you now. And they may not even be aware that they're there. Do you think maybe that describes your view towards people of faith? I mean, has the Supreme Court's reversal of you maybe prompted you to confront some implicit biases you may have against people of faith?
I'm a person of faith, so I would have to be having a bias against my own.
So you're telling me no? The answer is no?
I do not believe that I am biased against people of faith. I'm a person of faith. My whole family is a family of faith.
Let me read you what the Supreme Court said about your reasoning. They said, you cannot assume the worst when people go to worship, but assume the best when people go to work. Why did you assume the worst when people go to worship?
I did not assume the worst.
So they're wrong about that?
No, I'm just saying that at the time, I looked at the evidence before me, and I looked at the Ninth Circuit precedent at the time, which was you're supposed to look through these 7 factors about increased risk of transmission. And that's the precedent I followed. I completely will fully, faithfully, fairly, in every case going forward, adopt all 4 of the holdings that the Supreme Court made and clarified in Tandon. And I understand you cannot assume the worst of people as they go to worship.
But you think the
and when they
Supreme
go to
Court
work.
misdescribed your opinion in this regard when they said the state cannot assume the worst when people go to worship, but assume the best when people go to work? You think that's a misdescription?
I understand that's the law, and that is what I'm going to follow. I certainly had no intent to do that. At the time, I was following existing Ninth Circuit precedent and looking at risk of transmission and making findings based on the record, which is what I understand to be my job. I understand now that comparability has to be assessed in a different way. I understand that what the rule is on the narrow tailoring for strict scrutiny analysis. I understand how you look at what is neutral and generally applicable. All of that clarification, I really appreciate. I did not have it at the time when I issued that ruling, but I will fully, faithfully, and fairly follow that going forward.
Well, all I can say is that I'm concerned about the tone of your opinion. I'm concerned about the assumptions that underlie it. I think the Supreme Court's reversal of it was quite significant. And I think the assumptions that people of faith can't be trusted, but people who go to strip clubs, as Senator Kennedy said, can be, is frankly pernicious and something that's worth further examination. And for those reasons, among others, I can't support your nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Booker.
Let's just look at some of the things while you've been vacationing that your FBI has been doing. According to numerous whistleblowers who have come forward to members of this body, to members of the House, the FBI has been sending more than, in one instance, a dozen armed agents to a rural Pennsylvania home of a Catholic pro-life demonstrator to arrest him at gunpoint in front of his children in early morning hours, despite the fact that he posed no risk of violence or threat and had previously offered to turn himself in. Numerous whistleblowers, field agents, have alleged that D.C., your headquarters, has pulled them off working on child sex abuse cases, working on human trafficking cases, in order to work on January 6th matters for this reason, to give the appearance, they say, that there are hundreds of new domestic terrorism cases in the country, when in fact there are not. Whistleblowers, field agents have also said that D.C. has ordered the use of SWAT teams on nonviolent suspects who may have attended a January 6th rally, and they have been ordered to conduct surveillance and knock on doors of people who were not even in D.C. on January 6th. And again, all of this, according to the whistleblowers, these are your agents, all of this in order to make it look as if there's a mass surge in domestic terrorism all across the country, when in fact the stats are being padded by political directive in your office. They also say, these whistleblowers, the D.C. leadership deliberately suppressed investigations into Hunter Biden, contrary to FBI procedure, and have also retaliated against FBI agents and whistleblowers who have contacted Congress, which, by the way, they are protected by statute to do so. This is what's happening at your FBI while you are evading oversight hearings. Mr. Director, do you think you're still up to this job?
I absolutely think I'm still up to this job, and I think our workforce feels the same way.
Well, I don't. And frankly, I think you should have been gone a long time ago. And given your behavior recently, I think it only makes it more clear. Are there any travel plans today that we should be aware of that you have? We're supposed to have a second round. Will you be here for that?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, last fall, the parents and students at Jana Elementary in the greater St. Louis area, Florissant, Missouri, the Hazelwood School District, learned that their school was potentially contaminated by radioactive waste dating back to the Manhattan Project, as verified by independent third-party testing. This was in October of last year. The school was subsequently shut down. The kids were sent home. For months, they weren't in school at all. It was distance learning, which, as one parent said at a school board meeting, is not learning at all. Then they were bused to other school districts, which is currently happening now. The school is still closed. The kids have been given no permanent reassignments. They're being bused to all of these different districts. There's been no cleanup of the site whatsoever. The parents and the school board have repeatedly asked for testing by the United States government and cleanup. They have written to the Department of Energy. They have written to the Army Corps of Engineers. I have written to these agencies. I've written to the President multiple times asking for a government response to this government contamination. I asked your Deputy Secretary about this in February. He had no answers. I asked the Assistant Secretary last month. She had no answers. So I'm going to try you now that you're here. I assume you're briefed on this issue. Let's just start with this. On January 23rd, the school board wrote to your department and requested a site eligibility evaluation of all school district properties. Have you responded to them?
Yes, we did.
And what did you say?
We responded. First, let me just say, totally understand the significance of the parents' concerns here. Obviously, we don't want any school children to be going to school where there may be a risk of radiation. As you're probably aware, and as we said in the letter to them, that in 1997, Congress transferred the administration and the execution of formerly utilized sites remedial action program, FUSRAP, to the U.S. Army Corps. And that, it's my understanding, they have been doing testing, and they are the ones who have the responsibility and the jurisdiction for management of FUSRAP activities. It's only when a site has been totally cleaned up and finished that it comes over to our environmental management.
The Army Corps, as I'm sure you're aware, says the opposite. They have directed the school district to your agency. They have said, which is why the school board wrote to you on January 23rd. The Army Corps said they needed additional authorization from the Department of Energy, which is why they wrote to you. That is what they have told me as well. They can't do additional testing. They can't do any cleanup without additional authorization. They have pointed us to you. This is what I said to your Deputy Secretary in February. This is what I said last month. I have not gotten any responses from anybody, not from your department, not from the administration, nobody. I'm sure you can appreciate the deep frustration doesn't quite do it. These kids have been potentially exposed to radioactive waste in their school. The testing found it in the dust particles in the school itself, and now they can't go to school, and for months now, they have gotten complete runaround from this administration. The Army Corps says it's DOE's fault. DOE says, oh, it's the Army Corps' fault. Nobody will do anything. So what are you going to do?
Well, I'm going to follow up with the Army Corps because it's my understanding that they understood that it's in their jurisdiction, and if you're telling me something different, then I have to go back and follow up. So,
well, what are you going to do for the kids to get this school reopened? Will you designate it as a new FUSRAP site? You could designate the school under the Memorandum of Understanding. You can designate the school and the school district as a FUSRAP site. Will you do that?
Let me go back and check if I can, because it's my understanding it was not under our jurisdiction. It would not be until all cleanup is done. So let me follow up.
Okay. It is April. This happened in October. Mm-hmm. The school is still closed. The parents don't have any answers. Listen, I am dead serious about this. Until we get answers for these kids and until we get that school reopened and cleaned up, I'm going to hold every nominee to your department, every piece of legislation. I'm going to do the same thing with regard to the Army Corps. They have gotten the runaround, frankly, for years. This radioactive contamination's in the creek water that runs right by the school. This community has gotten the runaround for years. And just because it's a community of working people and doesn't have big class donors who give big money to politicians doesn't mean they can be ignored. And they have been ignored for literally decades, and now they've been ignored for months. And I'm not going to stand for it. So I'll stand in the way of anything and everything I have to until we get solutions and results. So you come back to me as soon as you can, but until we get some results here, I'm going to stand in the way until these kids get answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Hickenlooper.
I look forward to following up with you, Senator.
Thanks, Senator Padilla. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here. Let me start with what I hope is a simple question. Do we need to have more or fewer people coming to our southern border?
Senator, we are working on diminishing the number of people whom we encounter at our southern border because of the challenge it presents. We're trying to build lawful, safe, and orderly pathways to accomplish that.
Okay, fewer. So we need to have fewer, which means we need to roll back incentives to come. So I would have thought that would have been the answer. Let's talk about what you're doing, though. In January of this year, you rolled out a new phone app called CBP One, an app for a cell phone. I've got a picture of it behind me here. This phone app allows, and I'm going to quote from your own fact sheet, it allows, and I quote, non-citizens without appropriate documents for admission to schedule an appointment to come to the border. They can now go on their phone and schedule a time to come to the border and then be admitted. And you identified 7 separate border points of entry where they could come. 5 of them in Texas, 2 of them in California, 1 in Arizona. It's like a concierge service for illegal immigrants. My question is, you didn't think the border crisis was bad enough that now we're going to have an app that allows illegals to schedule their appointments and come and be admitted to this country?
Senator, you're mischaracterizing the use of the application. Let me explain it to you. We are currently enforcing the public health order of Title 42, and I know you're very familiar with it. There is a process for individuals who claim an exception to the Title 42 expulsion authority because of an acute medical condition.
Well, let's talk about this app.
If I may finish, an urgent humanitarian reason. So instead of them coming in between the ports of entry to claim that urgent medical condition, that extraordinarily acute humanitarian cause, we allow a limited number to arrive at our ports of entry and seek the emergency relief that they need.
Schedule, you allow them, let's be particular about what you do.
And I should say that the CBP One app was not unveiled for the first time on January 5th of this year.
Oh, no, but you changed it. You made it available on January 5th to the illegals themselves. You don't have to be a lawyer to use it. You don't have to be a member of a non-governmental organization. Anybody can download the app and use it on their phone. And for the first time, you allowed them to schedule appointments. Now, let's talk about what actually happens when they come to the border. It's interesting. You characterized this when you rolled it out as an application for applying for asylum. But nowhere on the app do you actually require the illegal migrants to apply for asylum or to claim asylum or anything about asylum. And in fact, when they then get to the border, you don't ask them questions, you don't do interviews, you just release them. Here's the Texas Monthly, not a notable conservative outlet, who reports, and I quote, "At no point does the app ask users, are you seeking asylum? Those arriving for the CBP One appointments are given no interviews, asked no questions about vulnerabilities that they may or may not have listed in the app or about why they're coming to the United States. They're simply released into the country," end quote. So rather than building a wall, Mr. Secretary, you have built Ticketmaster for illegal immigrants.
You are, Senator, you are conflating programs. Let me explain to you.
Just respond to this. Is it true that they are given no interviews, asked no questions, and simply released into the country?
Let me explain to you what we announced on January 5th.
No, I want you to explain to me what's happening. I know what you announced. I read it to you.
So I will explain to you what is happening.
Are they given interviews? Let's start with that. Are they given interviews?
We were previously experiencing
That's starting to sound like a no. Well, let's just hone in here. Mr. Secretary, my time is very limited. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to drive to some clarity here. The Texas Monthly has reported that once illegal immigrants go on their phone and reserve their time to come to the border, once they use your concierge service that you've created for them, when they come, they are given no interviews. They are asked no questions about any vulnerabilities. They are simply released into the country. Is that happening?
Senator, you are mistaken. And if I may explain.
Are they given interviews?
If I may explain, individuals who seek parole under our January 5th program for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans are screened and vetted before they arrive at our border.
Wait a minute. No, they go on the phone and they just reserve a time, and then they show up and they're given nothing. Listen to this. Even immigration advocates are amazed about this. Here, also from the Texas Monthly. Here's one immigration advocate whose first name is Orta. She says, that's the crazy part. Nothing in this new program requires you to actually seek asylum. Somehow, We've decided to punish those who arrive at the border without the app, who may be seeking asylum, but we just let in anybody who may or may not have any particular reason to seek asylum, so long as they've made an appointment on your Ticketmaster app. This seems crazy to me.
Senator, it's a complete mischaracterization of the program that we announced and are implementing.
So how many people have used the app then?
That you are referring to. So if I can explain.
How many people have used the app?
So we had a significant surge of Cubans.
How many people have used the app?
Nicaraguans and Venezuelans.
Mr. Secretary, you're here to answer my questions. How many people have used the app?
Tens of thousands have sought to make an appointment at the port of entry under our parole program.
Okay, good. How many have been admitted without an interview at the border?
You are, again, inserting a fact that does not belong in your question. So if I can, I will get you the precise...
I'm reading to you from public reports about how your own app works. You're just blanket denying. Actually, you're not quite denying it. You're saying that maybe we don't understand. Apparently, I don't understand. Texas Monthly doesn't understand. Immigration advocates don't understand. You're the only one who understands, yet you won't answer my question. How much did this cost to develop, by the way?
Senator, I don't have the cost, but let me share with you a critical
Well, will
fact.
you get it for us?
Let me share with you a critical
Will you
fact.
get us the cost of to develop this app?
Happily.
Did you contract with a tech firm to develop it?
Senator, we have seen approximately...
Did you contract with a tech firm to develop it?
We have seen an approximately
Oh, for heaven's sake.
95% decrease...
Did you contract with a tech firm to develop it? Yes or no?
Senator, this was led by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, our technical experts within the agency, and I certainly will get an answer to your question whether outside consultants were utilized
So you don't
in the
know.
development process.
You don't know.
May I explain to you, since you have a misunderstanding of the program, what it is and the impact, the positive impact it has had on encounters of these four populations in between the
I just
ports of
want to know
entry.
why it is that you are allowing people to come to this border to make appointments, to not be interviewed, and then how many have just been released? Is it true, by the way, as the Texas Monthly reports, that they're simply released into the country on official parole? And get this, they're not given, according to their reporting, any kind of follow-up. Their court dates are in immigration courts, the Texas Monthly reports, not even necessarily asylum trials. They're often general deportation hearings where defendants can make arguments for remaining in the country. Is that true?
That is a completely mistaken understanding of how the immigration process works. That language is completely confusing and erroneous.
Well, it is confusing. What's confusing is why anybody would think that an app like this to allow illegal immigrants to literally reserve a time to come to the border and then be ushered in without an interview, without follow-up, without tracking is stunning. It's absolutely stunning. Let me ask you in my very short time remaining something else about Chinese nationals. I've only got a minute left.
That is false.
Let me ask you about the Chinese nationals who we all saw coming over the border, busloads of them, and then being released in the American interior. What's the percentage increase of Chinese nationals who crossed the border this year, Mr. Secretary? Let's just focus on maybe the Rio Grande Valley
The
sector.
number of Chinese nationals encountered at our southern border has increased significely.
Do you know how much?
Over the past, I don't have the precise
I
percentage.
do. It's 900% just in the Rio Grande Valley sector. Are any of these people who came in this bus, these Chinese nationals, members of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, if an individual presents a national security or public safety threat, we detain them during the pendency
But that's not what I asked. I asked if they're members of the CCP.
during the pendency of their removal proceedings.
Are any of these individuals members of the CCP?
So
I think
if
there's about
indeed-
70 who came on this bus.
If indeed they are determined to be a national security threat or a threat to public safety, we detain them pending their removal proceedings.
Were any of these individuals detained, or were they released into the interior of the country?
I don't have awareness of that particular group of individuals.
And so you don't know if any of them were members of the CCP? Or actually, you do know, you just won't say.
I don't know from the photograph, Senator, to whom
But
you're
surely you
precisely
know about the folks who you've read this report, you're the Secretary of Homeland Security, you're aware of these individuals. Were any of them members of the Chinese Communist Party coming into this country?
Senator, you're providing me with a group of individuals without names, identities, or
So you're not
information.
familiar with this incident that was widely reported on at the southern border? Don't you think it's strange that we have busloads of Chinese nationals coming across our southern border? I'm asking you, from a hostile country, I'm asking you if they're members of the Chinese Communist Party, and you don't know, apparently, you won't say.
We are very focused on all things with respect to the People's Republic of
But
China.
you don't know any of the details. I plead exhaustion, Mr. Secretary. You have exhausted me, you have exhausted this panel, you have exhausted the patience of the American people. You should resign.
Senator Welch.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Just a couple of things. First of all,
Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here. Let's talk about the surge in child smuggling and child exploitation that is happening on your watch. Do you know the number of unaccompanied children who have come across the border on your watch?
Senator, I don't have that number at my
Well,
disposal, but I can assure you that we are incredibly dedicated to the safety and security of those children.
Well, it doesn't appear so, based on what we're reading today in the New York Times, what we're reading and seeing from numbers from your own office. The answer to my question, by the way, is 345,807. That's the number of unaccompanied children who have come across the border on your watch. Do you know what's happening to these children? Have you seen this report from the New York Times? Alone and exploited migrant children work brutal jobs across the United States. Have you seen this?
Senator, I have, and let me share with you what we are doing.
Have you seen these numbers? These are reports of trafficking and abuse of migrant children. You can see a massive surge that begins to happen when? When you come to office in 2021. Huge surge, reports of trafficking, reports of neglect and abuse. Let's just look at a few of the details. This is absolutely unbelievable. I can't believe this happens in the United States of America in this day and age. This is from the New York Times. Thousands of children have ended up in punishing jobs across the country, working overnight in slaughterhouses, replacing roofs, operating machinery in factories, all in violation of child labor laws. For example, there's a young girl named Carolina from Guatemala. She is 15 years old. What does she do? She packages Cheerios overnight at a factory. She says, sometimes I get tired and I feel sick. The Times goes on, her stomach often hurt. She was unsure if that was because of a lack of sleep or the stress of the incessant roar of the machines or her own worry. The Times goes on, far from home, many of these children are under intense pressure to earn money. They have to send cash back home to their families while often being in debt to their sponsors, quote unquote. For what? For smuggling fees, rent, and living expenses. One individual interviewed by the Times said this, I'm still quoting, it's the new child labor. You're taking children from another country and putting them into indentured servitude. I could go on and on. The Times details over a multi-month investigation, kid after kid, child after child. One 13-year-old forced to wash hotel sheets in Virginia. Kids running milking machines in Vermont, delivering meals in New York City, scrubbing dishes late at night, all in violation of our country's laws. All facilitated by your policies. Are you proud of this record?
Senator, the horrific exploitation of children is something that we do not condone. You are incorrectly attributing it to our policies. Let me share with you.
Wait a minute. It began, look at the numbers, It began, this massive surge began when you came to office. In your first year in office, there was a 342% surge of unaccompanied children across the border. You know, CBS reported that, I'm going to quote them now, Mr. Biden's election, as well as policy changes announced by his administration, those would be your changes, led smugglers to tell migrant youth they had a better chance of being allowed to stay in the United States than they had under Trump. Meanwhile, you've lost track of tens of thousands of them. The Times also reviewed data that showed the government couldn't reach more than 85,000 of these children who they just turned over into the hands of smugglers, these are modern day slave traders. And you're just giving these children to them. What is going on? Why are you doing this?
Senator, of course, there are a number of factual inaccuracies in your question, but let me address two lines of effort that we have to combat the scourge of exploitation.
Why don't we just start with why you enabled it? Can we just start with that? Why is it that you have enabled 345,000 children to be smuggled across this border and then sent into the hands of modern-day slave traders? In 2021, you made the decision to change Title 42 to allow unaccompanied children to come into the United States and then to be sent into the interior of the country. Under the last administration, children were reunited with their families in their home country. You changed that, and as soon as you changed it, the numbers exploded. That is your responsibility.
Quite a number of false statements, Senator.
What is false about that statement?
So if I can state what I've been trying to state, one of the significant policy decisions that we have made is to focus our worksite enforcement investigative efforts, our criminal investigative efforts on unscrupulous employers that exploit individuals because of their vulnerabilities, and that includes underage workers.
That is not what the New York Times investigation found. Mr. Chairman, I just ask at this point, I'd like to enter into the record the New York Times article, as migrant children were put to work, U.S. ignored warnings. This is from April 17th, 2023. This is this morning. And I'd also like to enter into the record the New York Times article, Alone and Exploited Migrant Children Work Brutal Jobs Across the U.S. This is from February 25th, 2023. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What these articles show, Mr. Secretary, is that the administration has done nothing but facilitate this crisis. You changed Title 42. You allowed hundreds of thousands of migrant children to come across the border, and then you made it worse. When they became a political crisis for you, when that huge surge of kids across the border because you changed Title 42, when it became an optics crisis, what did you do? You began pressuring officials and agencies to skip the vetting process and get these kids out as soon as possible to sponsors who weren't vetted. Here's the Times again. As shelters filled with children, the administration began loosening vetting restrictions and urging case managers to speed the process along. You have at every stage facilitated this modern-day indentured servitude of minor children. Why should you not be impeached for this?
Senator, I look forward to discussing this issue further because you are misstating the facts so terribly.
I am reading you the facts from articles in the news, and your usual modus operandi is what you're doing again today, which is just to deny. Why have you permitted 345,000 children to come into this country unaccompanied? Why have you permitted thousands of them to be abused and exploited?
Senator, what we do is we enforce the law. But let me just say this.
But you're not.
It is stunning to me, stunning, to hear you say that the prior administration reunited children with their parents.
Oh, I see. So this is their fault? But you're not going to take any responsibility for the indentured servitude and exploitation of children that is happening on your watch. A moment ago, you were crowing about the fact that you treated children so well, and yet we find tens of thousands of children who are forced to work as slaves because of your policies, and you turn around and blame a prior administration. Mr. Secretary, this is par for the course for you. You do it every time you appear before this committee. You do it every time you appear before Congress. I, for one, am sick and tired of it, and thousands of children are in physical danger because of what you are doing. You should have resigned long ago, and if you cannot change course, you should be removed from office. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Abadi, let me just stay with you. You just started to answer Senator Blackburn's question that not releasing the 1023 or talking about it as a matter of life and death, question of life and death, you said. Explain.
It is potentially a question of life and death
for whom?
With regard to the source of the information.
So, okay, so now we've confirmed that the document exists. That's progress because the FBI director initially denied that it exists. Why did he do that?
We have already and previously acknowledged the existence of the documents.
Yeah, after you first denied it. Now, when a member of this committee read it, right, the FBI director, let's just get the record straight. The FBI director initially said it doesn't exist. Then Senator Grassley said, I've read it. Then he said, oh, okay, well, gotcha. I guess it does exist. Now you're going back and forth with members of this committee, what's in it. Why don't you just release it? Is it classified?
The document is not classified.
Okay. Will you commit to releasing it?
Senator, we'll take that back, and we will work with you and this committee.
How about just a yes or no? Will you commit to releasing this unclassified document that alleges that the President of the United States, has taken $5 million or more in bribes from a foreign nation?
The document has already been released pursuant to a subpoena to the House Oversight Committee.
Has it been released to this committee?
We will work with this committee within the parameters that are established to meet
Will you
the
release the
request.
document to the public? It's unclassified. Don't you think the American people have a right to see it?
Senator, the document, as you know, contains sensitive information that has bearing on the life of the source of the information, potentially.
You can redact the source's name. We do this all the time.
In some instances, Senator, and I know you know this, that is not sufficient to protect people. And that's what we strive and work to do each and every day. And I hope you would take that seriously, too.
Oh, I take it very seriously. But I also take seriously the fact that your institution has repeatedly abused its authority, has repeatedly targeted political opponents. Your institution is the one that went to the door of pro-life protesters with SWAT teams to try and intimidate people because of their speech. Your institution is the one that treated parents as domestic terrorists because of their speech. Your institution is the one that, according to the court, the FISA court, ran 278,000 unwarranted, probably illegal queries on Americans, right? That was your institution, correct?
With respect to the compliance incidents, yes, some of the other things you cited, we can take them one by one. They are not.
Compliance, you would characterize the unlawful querying 278,000 times of American citizens as compliance issues?
We've said before, I've said that totally unacceptable.
Who's been fired for it?
Individuals involved are handled through the disciplinary process.
Who's been fired for it?
We have, in the case of the unintentional instance where something similar happened, we have fired people in the past.
Wait, I'm sorry. What does that word salad mean? The unintentional instance where what does that mean? Who's been fired for the 278,000 times that you improperly or illegally queried the database for American citizens? Anybody?
When we find intentional incidents.
Well, you're saying that the 278,000 queries were unintentional?
I believe that's correct.
Wow, 278,000 times American citizens' information was queried by your agency unintentionally? That's your testimony?
I would want to go back and check that, Senator.
Well, that's what you just told me.
My understanding is that the vast majority of
Well, wait, that's different. You just said it was. You just said it was unintentional. Now it's the vast majority. Which is it? Do you know?
I would want to go back and check it.
So you don't know?
My understanding is that likely all were unintentional.
Likely all. So first it was all of them, then it was vast majority. Now it's likely all. So you don't know is the answer to the question.
I don't know the answer as we sit here today, but I will find out.
Could have started
and I
with
will
that
get back to
probably.
you.
Who was fired for the lies to the FISA court for the Carter Page warrant? Who was fired for that? Anybody? Has anybody been held accountable for your institution deliberately lying to a FISA court to get a wiretap on an ongoing presidential campaign?
There is an ongoing disciplinary process with respect to individuals involved in that.
Here's the deal. You're back in front of us asking for the reauthorization of extraordinary authorities. Multiple courts have uncovered extraordinary abuses perpetrated by your agency. You are at the same time concealing information about serious allegations made against the President of the United States, even as your institution also targets his chief political opponent in an unprecedented way. Why would we ever give you the blank check that you want to continue surveilling American citizens in an improper manner? Why would we ever do that?
Senator, we're here to talk about reforms today. I did get confirmation that the query...
No, we're not. We're here to talk about the reauthorization of Section 702. Why would we reauthorize it, given your track record of abuse and illegal improper surveillance and political targeting? Why would we do that? Why would it be appropriate for this body to do that?
We've made significant reforms and implemented corrective measures. We've seen significant progress as a result of that, Senator. The queries that you mentioned early were, in fact, unintentional. That's what I was just told by my counterpart.
That
to
is an
clarify
amazing.
the earlier question.
So your testimony is the 280,000 queries of American citizens was unintentional. That's your final answer?
That's how they were assessed by that team that did the review. I'm not satisfied with that. That's
Yeah, I
why
don't believe
we've
that at all.
implemented further measures, as I announced earlier today.
Yeah, I don't believe that at all. And frankly, we've heard from your agency 1,000 times that you're going to do better, will do better. You promised after the abuses of Title I you'd do better, and then we find out that in the meantime you're illegally querying 280,000 American citizens' data. It's unbelievable, frankly. Everything you say is unbelievable.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you very much to the ranking member, and thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks to the witnesses for being here. General Stitt, let me talk with you. Let me start with you, if I could. I have spoken repeatedly with the Secretary of the Army about replacing aging homes at Fort Leonard Wood in my home state, and there is no doubt in my mind that service members deserve better than they are getting right now. I was just there a few weeks ago. I toured the homes myself. I spoke to residents. I spoke to spouses. I spoke to children who lived in the homes. These homes need to be replaced. What concerns me is the Army doesn't seem to have a plan to replace this aging housing stock. So let me just ask you this. In your opinion, how does the availability or maybe lack of availability of quality military housing for service members and their families affect recruiting and retention?
Senator Hawley, good afternoon. The Army takes the care and quality of life of all of our service members and their families very seriously, so we are making and committed to investing in our housing within not just that, but within our daycare centers, child care, offering opportunities, expanding beyond that for spousal employment, to put kind of a whole package on the table to ensure that our facilities and our care and commitment towards family members is first class.
When you say a whole package, when will we be seeing this package?
Senator, we continue to work on it, and I can take that question for the record, please.
Well, that's fine. I mean, but let me just say again, for the record, I've said this in the full committee, I'll say it again here, that I think we're past the point of continuing to kick this down the road. I mean, this is a problem now. Frankly, at Fort Leonard Wood, it was a problem a decade ago. But listen, I've been there. I mean, I've seen it myself. I've talked to the service members myself. I've been in their houses. I've been in their kitchens. I've looked at their bathrooms where there's mold growing. I've seen that they don't have places for their kids. I've seen the substandard living conditions, and it just isn't acceptable, General. You know what? I promised those service members that I'd be a royal pain in the you-know-what until something changed. So I'm keeping that commitment, and I'm going to continue it until something changes. And frankly, I've heard this now it's going on 2 years. I've only been in the Senate 3, but I've heard it continuously that, well, we'll get to it, we'll get to it, we'll get to it. Well, at Fort Leonard Wood, we haven't gotten to it. And I bet, if we went around the table here, I bet that the other members of the subcommittee would have the same situation in their state. So I'll give you the question for the record, but I just want to put on notice again, and you can take this back, that I want to see some progress on this, and I want to see it soon. And what I don't want to see are any more commitments from the Army that they're going to spend X number of dollars. This happened last year. We're going to commit X number of dollars to Fort Leonard Wood, and then as it turns out, $0 were spent on housing. I'm still ticked off about that. And I don't want to see it happen again, and I want to see progress made. So that's my piece. I think you understand where I'm coming from. General Miller, let me come to you. Can you help me with something here? Anderson Air Force Base, I understand. This is in Guam, of course. Leaders there recently received an official email that prohibited them from using pronouns or descriptors like he, she, youngest, oldest, male, or female. Why is that? I mean, what's going on?
Senator Hawley, thank you for that question. Actually, that is, we've been talking a lot about that because it was an email, from my understanding, that went out locally from one of the commanders there, and I don't remember at what level. I don't know if it was a group commander or the wing commander there. I believe that it was a Facebook post that went out based on a question. It is not the Air Force policy to not use pronouns. And so I think it was a social media, exacerbated by individuals that said that they were directed for that.
Okay, good. Well, I think that's progress. So you're saying, I'm looking at a news article here published August 31, 2022, saying that PACAF has sent this letter around. Leaders of the base are instructed, do not use pronouns, age, race, etc. And they go on. The unauthorized examples of unauthorized language are male, female, youngest, oldest, he, she. But you're saying that was not an official communication. That has not been a directive.
That is not an official communication from the HAF. Correct.
Okay. And so your position to me is today that is not policy and that they have not been so instructed.
That is correct.
This is a social media
policy.
kerfuffle. I mean, this is not real. It's not happening.
I don't know if it's not happening, but it is not an official policy from the Department of the Air Force.
Okay. I ask because part of the way it's been reported is that the rationale is to help with lethality and also recruiting. And it was curious as heck how not using he, she can help with lethality and how it's helping with recruiting. But I take your word for it that this is not policy, and that satisfies me. So thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just briefly, you've been asked several times, I've heard the questions about your work as co-chair of the Delaware Supreme Court's Diversity Strategic Planning Steering Committee. That's a mouthful, but you've been asked about this. I just want to ask you about one thing in the report. The report talks about how important it is for the Delaware Supreme Court, I'm going to quote now, to take steps to reduce implicit bias and identity threat in the court environment. And it goes on to say that one of the things that might reduce identity threat is to get rid of the historic portraits of some of the white justices who've served on the court. Can you explain to me what identity threat is and why getting rid of portraits of judges and justices who've served on the courts would help with that?
Thank you so much for the question, Senator. I am not familiar with the term identity threat, so I don't have an explanation I don't have a definition for you. I can give you a definition of.
It's in the report, though. I mean, I'm quoting, to take steps to reduce implicit bias and identity threat in the court environment. I mean, this is your report.
Well, I understand, but one thing that I've attempted to explain is that I didn't draft the report. We had an entire committee that was creating a report to be delivered to the Supreme Court. Yes,
you signed off on it, though, didn't you?
So there wasn't a sign-off necessarily on the report.
Your name's on it, though.
I understand. I was a co-chair of the committee, but I didn't draft all the words to the report. I didn't draft the recommendations to the report. The Supreme Court is considering the report, and we haven't done anything with that particular recommendation.
So you don't know what identity threat is?
Well, I did not put those words in there, and I'm not entirely sure what whoever drafted that specific one meant by that one.
It seems kind of crazy to me, I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to clarify this because you've had three people.
Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Assistant Secretary Light, if I could just start with you. In the years leading up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, almost a year old now, many European governments prioritized what they called the climate objectives. I'm not sure that their policies actually improve their environment, but that was their surmise. Climate objectives over energy abundance. And in particular, they prioritized cheap energy from an authoritarian regime over energy independence. Do you think that playbook executed by governments in Europe is something we ought to be doing in the United States?
I think that the clear lesson is that no country should be beholden to one supplier for its energy sources or a very large proportion of its energy sources, and that energy security is built on energy diversification. I think that energy diversification is at the backbone of U.S. energy policy, and so I don't see any risk that the United States will follow suit in that respect.
Well, you say energy security is built on energy diversification. I would have thought energy security would be based on energy independence. Am I wrong about that?
I think it's independence, but I also think that it's not just one source of energy because things can go wrong. No one should put all of their chips on sort of one marker when it comes to energy security. So I think to have as diverse a supply as possible while still looking at other goals like climate goals is a very good path forward for countries to take, and it's something that the United States wants to support other countries in helping to do.
Well, why wouldn't we put our chips on American energy? And we've got various sources of energy in this country. Why wouldn't we put our chips there?
I think we are putting our chips.
No, we're not. We're producing less oil and gas in this country than we were previously. The president, when he came to office, his first day in office, he imposed a moratorium on oil and gas leases on federal land. Since then, he has leased the fewest acres of federal land for oil and natural gas since the Truman administration. Why are we shutting down American oil and natural gas production, taking away American jobs, and making ourselves more dependent on foreign sources of energy? I don't understand this policy.
Well, the U.S. will produce a record amount of both crude oil and natural gas in 2023, even higher than the spike's pre-COVID levels. And the president is actively encouraging U.S. oil producers to increase production and reinvest their profits back into production rather than buying back stocks. And I think that's the right policy to pursue.
He's doing that while he is shutting down the ability to lease federal land for oil and natural gas, the fewest acres of federal land leased since the Truman administration. He's boasted about how he hopes that he just said in the State of the Union that we may not need American oil after another 10 years. I mean, what kind of a message does that send? Is that energy security?
So any questions about leasing on federal land, I would direct to the Department of Interior, not the Department of Energy, sir.
Oh, listen, don't play that game with me. We're talking here about energy production. Oil and natural gas are energy production. And the facts of the matter are this president has reduced our ability to be energy independent. And you're sitting here telling me that that increases our energy security. It looks just the opposite to me. It seems to me that you're recommending the European playbook, which left them dependent on foreign nations, left them dependent ultimately on hostile actors, and that's what you're trying to replicate here again in the United States. I just don't understand why this course of action is being recommended, why your administration's pursuing it. I also don't understand why you would shut down pipelines that cancel thousands of good-paying American energy jobs. I mean, why is that a healthy energy policy for this country?
With all due respect, sir, I really don't see much of a comparison between where Europe was before the outbreak of the war and their energy mix and where they were getting energy from and where the United States is today.
Well, let me just ask you, on the topic of dependence on authoritarian regimes, about China. China is one of the largest processors of the materials that serve as the building blocks for many of the so-called green energy transition that the administration is pursuing. According to the IEA, China processes 40% of the world's copper, more than 30% of the nickel in the world, 60% of cobalt, 60% of lithium, and more than 80% of rare earth minerals. Now, in light of that, many commentators have suggested that the United States is even more dependent on China for key components of solar power, panels, wind turbines, and batteries than Europe was on Russia in the lead up to the invasion of Ukraine. So I say again, in light of all of that, don't you think that this administration's climate agenda is making us more dependent on China while we lessen our reliance on our own domestic energy sources?
Well, sir, as I said in my testimony before, I think you're absolutely right. China does own too much of the critical minerals supply chain from ownership of resources, through processing, and through the creation of modules and other sort of parts of clean energy components.
So why would you want to make us more dependent on them?
Use the tools that the Congress has given us, sir, to make sure that we diversify the supply chains, reshore as many of them, and create sound relationships with non-Chinese suppliers. That is absolutely a top priority of this administration.
For heaven's sake, here's what you've done. You came to office. You took us from being an energy independent nation to being an energy dependent nation. You have made us more dependent. Now this administration's gone begging to OPEC and dictators all around the world. You have made us less energy secure. Now you're making us energy dependent on China. You're canceling good-paying American jobs. It's a disaster, and all the while increasing the cost of energy across this nation. It is an absolute disaster, and I can't imagine why, in light of what happened in Ukraine, we would want to replicate those disastrous policies here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of the witnesses for being here. Chairman Phillips, let me just start with you. Let me start in my home state of Missouri in St. Louis. The Spire pipeline in St. Louis, as you probably know, has had a long and somewhat unhappy saga until recently. Finally, in December of this past year, the commission gave the pipeline a certificate to operate. I'm asking you about it because, as I hope you know, residents of the St. Louis area have been repeatedly told that their gas bills would rise in a very significant way if the pipeline was not able to operate. Can you give me some assurance that the Spire pipeline in St. Louis will continue to be authorized for the foreseeable future?
Senator, as you know, we handle pipeline certifications on a case-by-case basis. We have a public interest obligation and determination to be made. We take them as they come. My understanding is that I will double-check to make sure with my staff to see what the status is of Spire in particular, but that is the way we approach pipelines, and I support that case-by-case approach.
Okay, good. Well, if you could get back to me, that would be helpful. I want to make sure that this pipeline, which is now FERC approved, continues to operate and that we don't see major disruptions in service for the residents of the St. Louis region. Let me ask you about rural co-ops. My state is a majority rural state. Our rural electric co-ops are a hugely important part of our energy grid in the state of Missouri. They have been facing major supply chain issues, in particular, the purchasing of new transformers. Tell me what you're doing to help keep prices down for rural electric co-ops.
Again, we have a number of reforms that we're moving forward right now. A huge part, and I think affordability is addressed in some of our reforms right now, and it will benefit the country. The more resources that we can bring on, I believe we can help in the long term lower prices for consumers.
Great. Well, I want to make sure that we keep the price of electricity affordable, and again, especially in our rural areas in the state, especially working with rural electric co-ops. That's a huge priority. I look forward to working with you on that. Let me turn to Commissioner Clements. Let me ask you, some emails disclosed last year via a FOIA request showed that you briefed a funders-only session at a left-leaning grant-making foundation called the Energy Foundation about FERC 2022 priorities. Who were the donors who attended that session?
There was not fundraising in the meeting you asked about. It was a convening of foundation staff from across the country, and I was having a very kind of straightforward, above-the-board conversation about 2022 priorities. Subject to my ethics agreement and any ex parte restrictions, I have an open-door policy, so I meet with all kinds of stakeholders. I've actually never said no to a meeting between either my staff taking it or myself.
Wait a minute. You said it was staff. The FOIA information says it was advertised as a funders-only session. Donors.
I'm not sure. It wasn't an advertised thing. There are foundations that work together.
It was briefed as a funders-only session, meaning that there were donors there. So who were the donors?
I think it's important to understand that what my role to do is engage with these stakeholders. When I was invited to present to a group of foundation staff, just like when I'm invited to present to the board of...
I don't understand what you keep using the word staff. The information says that there were funders present. There were donors. I want to know who the donors are. Who were the donors? You give me a list?
I'd be happy to. I
Good.
don't remember specifically, but I'd be happy to.
Good. Was there money raised at the event that you spoke at?
No.
What were the FERC 2022 priorities that you spoke with this donor group about?
I gave my standard speech that I give when I speak to any convening of stakeholders who participate in the sector.
You use stakeholders now several times. Does that include industry donors? Is that a definition of stakeholder now? Our major donors?
Yeah.
Do you think it's appropriate that you would be giving closed-door briefings to donors?
No, and I didn't do that, sir.
What do you mean you didn't do it? This is the information says that it was a funders event. It was a funders-only session at a foundation that raises money from donors.
I provide my stump speech on my own FERC priorities to many different kinds of groups.
Donors?
Many convening. Some of them might be donors in any capacity. Certainly,
Did any of those donors who were present that day have a financial interest in the energy industry?
Almost everyone I speak to has a financial interest in the energy industry.
Oh, wow. Okay. So this is a normal practice of yours to speak to groups that have financial interests in your industry?
So when I go and I talk to the board of EPSA or the EEI CEOs or the interstate pipeline member companies, all of whom I have spent time with, the idea is that subject to ethical responsibilities and also my ex parte restrictions, I engage with them. I tell them my priorities.
Do you think it's appropriate, my time is running out here, do you think it's appropriate to speak to advocacy groups at a donors-only session? Do you think that that's appropriate?
I think it is appropriate to speak with foundations who are interested in the energy.
To their donor sessions? Wow. Wow. I have to say, I think that that's pretty problematic. I would like a list of the donors. I'd like to know who was there. I'm concerned about this, what you've now described as a pattern and practice of speaking to donor groups that have financial interests in the industry you are regulating. I think that's a big problem. If that's not currently foreclosed by law, we ought to foreclose it, Mr. Chairman. But you said that you do this on a regular basis. We'll probably follow up. I think I'm probably going to need to see a list of all the groups you've spoken to. I'm going to want to know the donors that you've spoken to. I am extremely, extremely disturbed by what you have just told me. And at a time when we have major ethics issues, we've got members of Congress buying and selling stock based on information that only they are privy to. We've got members of the executive branch who are buying and selling stock in industries that they regulate. And now we've got you speaking to donors in industries that you regulate.
Senator, thank you.
That's a problem.
Thank you.
That's a problem, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad we're having this hearing. And thank you to all of the witnesses. Thank you for being here. I want to visit with you in just a second, but I just want to reiterate something that I heard the chairman say that I agree with, which is that there really ought to be government witnesses sitting there. And I tell you what I'm tired of. I've had Secretary Mayorkas sit in front of me in a different committee, the Homeland Security Committee, where I asked him at length about the outrage of 250,000 migrant children, unaccompanied, crossing the border in the last 2 years, and tens of thousands of them being sold into slavery. Let's not mince words. They've been sold into slavery. When kids are being put into factories, forced to work overnight, forced to work in terrible conditions, they're not getting paid, they're not going to school, sometimes they're not getting fed, that's slavery. And what I heard from Secretary Mayorkas, don't take my word for it, you go look at the record, read the transcript. What he told me was, oh, it's not my problem. We don't have anything to do with it. Not my problem. Now we have a new report from HHS where they say it's not their problem. Amazing how this works. Nobody's responsible. These kids are literally being sold as slaves in the United States of America in the year 2023, and nobody's responsible. They don't want to come and testify to this committee. You bet they don't. They don't want to be put under oath. They don't want to answer any questions. They don't want cameras here. They don't want to take any responsibility. Well, I tell you, it's somebody's fault. It's not the kids' fault. Thank God for the New York Times, phrase I never thought would come out of my mouth. But really, thank the Lord that the New York Times did these series of reports, because otherwise we'd still be fed the lies from this administration that everything is fine and dandy. We know just where the kids are. It's all great. They're all fine. No, it's not. Is it fine that people like Carolina Yuck, who's 15 years old, I apologize to her if I mispronounced her name, she's one of the folks, one of the young women that the New York Times caught up with. What is she doing? Midnight in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a conveyor belt carrying bags of Cheerios past a cluster of young workers. Carolina, every 10 seconds, has to stuff a sealed plastic bag of cereal into a passing yellow carton. It's dangerous work, fast-moving pulleys and gears that had torn off fingers and ripped open a woman's scalp. The factory was full of underage workers like Carolina who'd crossed the southern border by themselves, vulnerable, now spending late nights bent over hazardous machinery in violation of child labor laws. Carolina says, sometimes I get tired and feel sick. Her stomach often hurt. She was unsure if that was because of the lack of sleep, the stress from the incessant roar of the machines, or the worries she had for herself and her family in Guatemala. This is totally, utterly, completely unacceptable. And I am sick unto death of this administration coming before this Congress and saying, it's not our fault, we have nothing to do with it, we don't know where they are, the kids are fine, somebody will do it, somebody will get around to it. Ridiculous. Let's look at some of the things that we've learned about what's going on over at HHS that Secretary Becerra is doing. Here's some quotes from employees at HHS. At least 5 Health and Human Services staff members said that they were pushed out after raising concerns about child safety. This is all from the New York Times, by the way. Mr. Becerra told the Office of Refugee Resettlement Director that if she could not increase the number of discharges of children, he'd find somebody who would. Next, 20% of kids have to be released every week or you get dinged. It's a conveyor belt of children being forced through the system. And what's the priority of HHS? Just get them out as fast as we can. They go to factories. They go to slave labor. No. I've written to the FBI and asked the FBI, where are the 80,000 plus children this administration's lost? They don't know. I've said it's your responsibility to go get them. It's a direct violation of child labor laws. They're not doing anything. Nobody's doing anything. It's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous. And the fact that the administration won't come and sit there and answer questions to this committee is absurd. And it is nothing more than cowardice. They don't want to answer questions. They don't want to be responsible. They don't want to take responsibility for this. So let the record reflect that this administration has let tens of thousands of children be sold into slavery, and they are doing nothing about it. And I hope, Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you said that we would be holding additional hearings. We need to have additional hearings. There need to be administration witnesses there, and we need to figure out what in the world is going on and who's to be held accountable for this. Because I tell you what's not an acceptable answer. It's not acceptable to say, it's not my problem. We wish the kids the best. The kids are in danger. The kids are in slavery. The kids are being exploited. And it should not happen in the United States of America. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing, and I, too, am glad that we're going to have others, because I'm hoping that we'll have bipartisan support not only for enforcement of prohibitions against exploiting child labor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to come back, Madam Secretary, to this trade-off between energy security and the radical climate change agenda that you've endorsed, which is less energy security for America, radical climate change agenda. On the subject of these sweeping mandates related to electric vehicles that the Biden administration has imposed, including now for our military, the metals needed to make the lithium-ion batteries in those vehicles are, of course, lithium, nickel, graphite, and cobalt. Now, can you tell me what nation is the largest producer of refined lithium in the world?
No, I can't.
It's China. Can you tell me which nation is the largest producer of refined cobalt in the world?
No, Senator.
It's China. Do you know what nation is the largest exporter of natural graphite to the United States globally?
No, Senator.
It's China.
Okay.
So in all of these instances, these mandates, your decision to trade off our energy security in favor of a radical climate change agenda is making us more and more dependent on China. And at the same time, you are denying mining, blocking permits for mines in this country that would allow us to develop nickel and copper and cobalt. Why? Why block the development of these resources in our own nation in favor of making us dependent on China?
Senator, are you referring to the Boundary Waters?
I'm referring to the Twin Metals mine in Minnesota. I think that Senator Bross was just asking about it.
Yes, near the Boundary Waters, which is an iconic place and, of course, a very valuable ecological system to many plants, animals, species.
But jobs for, let me just say this though, jobs for blue-collar workers in this nation are valuable resources. The livelihood and well-being of American families are valuable resources. The ability of America to have our own industry and not be dependent on China is a valuable resource. Why should those things for millions of Americans be sacrificed in favor of your agenda for radical climate change?
Senator, I know that there's like 1.9 jobs for every American in the country right now, so I know there's a lot of jobs.
Wait a minute. You're telling me you're telling me we've got too many jobs in the country?
Well, I'm saying that we don't have enough people. That's why we are having a hard time finding folks to work at our department. But
wait, you're telling me that we have too many jobs for blue-collar work? Have you seen the number of jobs we have lost in this country to China in the last 20 years? Do you know where those jobs come from? Over 3 million jobs have gone to China. Do you know where those jobs have come from? They've come out of Midwestern towns like the ones I represent. They are blue-collar workers, and you're sitting here and telling me that we have too many jobs in this country? Are you serious?
Senator, we are working hard every single day. We have processed 20 mining applications, 20 mines or mining modification permits since January of 2021. We are moving forward. We're doing our jobs. We're fulfilling our mission for
You're
the
not moving
department.
forward, you're moving backward. You're shutting down and denying permits for mines in this country where we can develop our own resources. You're shutting down oil and natural gassing permits. You're approving taxes and royalties that deliberately suppress American energy development in favor of a climate change agenda. And now you're sitting here and telling me we've got too many jobs in this country. We've got gobs of jobs in this country. We don't need any more jobs in this country. I want to take the strongest possible exception to that comment and to that entire mentality, which I think is very honest. I think it reflects the mentality of your administration, which is when it comes to blue-collar workers in this country, you're on your own. Good luck. Good luck to you. We got plenty, just shut up and go get a job at McDonald's, whatever. No more, quit complaining about the loss of American industry. I mean, good Lord, that is extraordinary. What an extraordinary response.
May I say something?
Absolutely. The rest of the time's yours.
Thank you. Contrary to that, we have created a number of jobs. We have an orphan gas program where we've capped orphan oil and gas wells, an abandoned mine reclamation project that has lifted whole communities up in reclaiming their mine lands that have devastated their communities. These folks have been out of jobs for years, and now because of the bipartisan infrastructure law, because of the Inflation Reduction Act, they found new ways to engage and not only have jobs, but have a vision for what they want their communities to look like. We have plugged orphan gas wells in people's backyards in Pennsylvania, and we're doing so in California and Texas. These are communities that rely on this government to find a way forward for them. There is, unfortunately, a dearth of legacy pollution in this country. Those are jobs, good-paying, well-paying jobs with benefits that Americans are having because of President Biden and his policies. And we're proud to move those issues and those programs forward for the American people.
My time has expired. I'll just say in conclusion again. Trading off American energy security in favor of your radical climate change agenda, shutting down good-paying American jobs in our energy sector, and then saying the explanation is we've got plenty of jobs in this country, I think is the most potentially, and this is quite a high bar, I might add, the most unbelievable statement I have heard from a member of this administration, maybe in my time in the Senate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you.
Hawley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to all of the nominees. Judge Ali Khan, I think last time you and I visited, it was before the Homeland Security Committee, and I asked you a number of questions there. You, including some for the record, you answered those, which I appreciated. One question that I ask you, and I ask every nominee actually on that committee and this one, is whether or not the nominee has ever litigated against a religious liberty claim. Usually the answer to that's no. In your case, you answered yes, and you listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different cases over a period of years, actually, in which you have litigated against individuals or churches' religious liberty claims. So let's just talk about a few of those, if we could. Let's start with some of your work during COVID. Case you list here, Capitol Hill Baptist Church versus Bowser. Do you remember that case?
Yes, Senator.
You remember working on that case?
Yes, Senator.
This was a case involving the district's lockdown policies that shut down churches in the district. Is that correct?
It concerned litigation over provision of the lockdown policies. The policies restricted all types of activity in the district.
All types of activity in the district?
Yes, Senator.
Did it restrict mass protests in the district?
Well, it restricted activities that one normally expected, including work, going to stores. It also did include these provisions that were challenged concerning churches.
So it exempted unusual or unlikely activities that's in the statute, that's in the ordinance?
When the mayor was enacting these orders at the outset of the pandemic, I think she was trying to be as comprehensive as she could, and the order did restrict a number of daily activities of district residents.
But it exempted mass protests?
I don't believe it said anything one way or another.
Can you point me to the text where it exempted mass protests?
I don't believe it said anything one way or another.
Of course it didn't, because it didn't exempt mass protests, right? You know that.
I think it was silent on the issue because I don't believe it was contemplated by the mayor's office.
Ah, so you think that mass protests should be in a different category than religious observances? Is that your position?
I think if there were protests on the book, then the mayor might have thought about that when she was enacting the COVID-19 restrictions. But I think she was trying to protect public
So
health.
you think it's fine to say to religious people that they are prohibited from gathering outside, wearing a mask, socially distanced. They can't do it. But if you want to come and protest, defund the police, if you want to support that, that's fine. You can gather en masse, person to person, close up, thousands of people. That's okay. That discrimination's okay. That was your position?
Senator, that is not my position.
It was your position. It's what you argued.
I did not write these orders. What I said.
You defended it in court. And you just articulated to me what I take to be your position.
What I was doing in a Capitol Hill Baptist church was defending the mayor, my client, against a constitutional challenge to one aspect of the COVID-19 restrictions. We understood that strict scrutiny applies.
How did that case go for you?
We lost that case.
Why?
It was found that the restrictions did not meet the standard of strict scrutiny.
Meaning they were unconstitutional.
Meaning that they did not survive strict scrutiny. And it's a matter of public record that the District of Columbia did not appeal that decision.
Why? Why were they struck down?
Excuse me, Senator?
Why were the restrictions that you defended struck down as discriminatory? Why were they?
Because they did not satisfy.
Why didn't they?
The court concluded that there were restrictions that were not neutral of general applicability.
Yeah. That's legalese. Why didn't they? Why didn't they on the facts? You know the facts. You were a good lawyer. Why'd you lose?
We lost because applying the strict scrutiny test, the court concluded that the restrictions were not narrowly tailored to serve a compelling governmental interest.
Because?
Senator.
Oh, come on, Judge. Don't make me do this. Do you want me to go through it for you? You lost because Mayor Bowser was going to mass protests herself personally with thousands of people celebrating them. By the way, which is fine. We have a First Amendment in the United States. I want to be clear. That is totally fine. You want to protest? Go for it. I think that's totally fine. That wasn't the problem here. At the same time she was doing that, she was prohibiting churches, religious people, from gathering socially distanced outside wearing masks. And the district court said, you can't do that. That's discrimination. You can't separate people out based on their ideological beliefs or their positions. You can't do that, right? Isn't that what the district court said?
The district court said that
do you agree with it?
Could not survive strict scrutiny.
For those reasons, right? Why are you fighting me on this? I can't figure this out.
I am not fighting you, Senator.
So yes, you agree. That's what the district court said.
That was what the district court concluded.
Do you think they got it right? The district court get it right?
The district court, we did not appeal that decision. I think that district court decision is consistent with rulings that we got from the Supreme Court clarifying the application of the religious test to COVID-19 restrictions in Tandon and the Brooklyn Archdiocese.
My time's almost expired, and I know other senators want to ask questions, so let me just very quickly here. Do you think it's wrong to discriminate on the basis of religious faith?
Absolutely, Senator.
Why did you argue that religious services, religious people pose a greater risk of infection than people gathered to argue for defunding the police?
I was representing my client. The mayor and consulting epidemiologists had issued orders that she thought were going to protect public health. It was my role to defend those as a member.
Why did you make that argument? This seems like a strange argument to me, that religious people are somehow, more infectious than folks who have other ideological positions? I don't get it.
My understanding was the nature of singing and other things epidemiologists thought could transmit COVID at a higher rate.
You didn't put any scientific evidence on the record for it?
Senator, those were fast-moving cases, and they weren't going to full briefing and full summary judgment with a record.
That's not what the district court said. The district court said that you engaged in, and your client engaged in, and you defended discrimination on the basis of religious belief, that you offered no scientific evidence for it, that you pressed these arguments over and over and over without any foundation. Frankly, I'm disappointed that you made those arguments. You can choose what arguments to make. I'm disappointed you made those arguments. I'm disappointed you persisted in defending them here today. And for that reason, among others, I will not support your nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tillis.
The Constitution doesn't contain an emergency powers exception, does it? An emergency exception? Can it be suspended in the case of an emergency?
There is nothing explicitly in the Constitution that provides any sort of suspension during cases of emergency.
Can the Bill of Rights be suspended during an emergency?
There's nothing in the Constitution that provides for that.
What about the Equal Protection Clause? Can it be suspended during an emergency? Government disfavors a certain group of people because it's convenient for the government?
Again, Senator, there's nothing in the Constitution that provides for that.
Okay, help me then understand your opinion in the Cassell case. This is about Governor Pritzker in your state, his orders, or
within your jurisdiction, his stay-at-home order during the COVID-19 pandemic. He issued an order that allowed essential businesses and operations to operate at 50% capacity, but it applied only to secular institutions and services. He explicitly said religious activity was subject to a different rule. Religious activity, churches, synagogues, could only have 10 people in them. Everybody else, all other essential services, could have 50%, so hundreds of people go shopping, whatever. But religious activity, oh no, only 10 people or fewer for those folks. Different rule, explicitly different rule. You upheld that in the Cassell case, this differing standard that singled out religious people for disfavor. And you said that the Supreme Court of the United States has said that different rules apply during pandemics. The strange thing is I'm reading the case on which you relied, and it says nothing of the sort. You cite Jacobson versus Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That's a 1905 case. You say that the Jacobson court explained that the traditional tiers of constitutional scrutiny do not apply. That phrase doesn't appear anywhere in that opinion. Tiers of scrutiny weren't invented by the Supreme Court for another 40 years. So help me understand where you're coming from in this case. Why did you conclude that religious people could be singled out for disfavor?
Thank you, Senator Hawley, for that question. As I stated previously, when I decided the Cassell case, which was later affirmed by the Seventh Circuit, it was early on in the pandemic, and we did not have the benefit of the various other rulings by the Supreme Court that came down after my ruling on Cassell.
That held just the opposite.
That I guess I'm referring to Roman Catholic as well as Camden.
Right,
And,
in which the Supreme Court held that you could not single out religious people for disfavor. State of New York tried to do precisely the same thing. And the Supreme Court said, actually, plaintiffs have a strong likelihood of success on the merits. You said they have no likelihood of success on the merits. So just help me explain. The Supreme Court took a totally different view. Help me explain how you looked at the same Constitution and came to a totally different conclusion. Why is it okay to single out religious people for disfavor? I don't understand it.
What I looked at was whether or not the Governor Pritzker's order was neutral and generally applicable, to decide whether, at that time, secular activities were generally applicable. I looked at the type of activities as well as kind of the sort of risks, the varying degree of risks that were present in those instances. So, for example,
well, can I just stop you right there? I'm sorry, I've only got 1 minute left. I'm sorry, but you've raised, I think, a really important point, because the standard is, when it comes to First Amendment violations, is the law neutral and generally applicable? This regulation wasn't neutral and generally applicable. It had one set of rules for shops, businesses, and a completely different set of rules for churches, which is, of course, what the U.S. Supreme Court ruled. I don't understand how you can look at that and say it's neutral and generally applicable.
The order, as I recall, also closed, for example, movie houses and auditoriums, as well as schools. And so when I considered the activities at movie houses and schools compared to activities carried on at churches, I found those to be, at the time, using the time pre-Tandon test, to be generally comparable or comparable. I agree, and I found that
But the order said that religious houses of worship were essential. So it said that essential businesses could be open, essential services, but at 50%. Initially, it didn't include any carve-out for religious, any acknowledgement that religious services might be essential. He amended that, said, no, they are essential, but I'm going to cap them. So two completely different rules. Let me just, my time's about expired, so let me just read to you something from the Jacobson case, which you cite, which I'm surprised you didn't heed. Here's what the Jacobson case says. No rule prescribed by a state, nor any regulation adopted by a local governmental agency shall contravene the Constitution of the United States or infringe any right granted or secured by that instrument. A local enactment or regulation, even if it's based on the police powers of a state, must always yield, in a case of conflict, with the exercise by the government of any power it possesses under the Constitution, or to any right which that instrument, meaning the Constitution, gives or secures. I'm baffled that you would cite this case in support of a decision that treated religious believers differently, indeed disfavored them, compared to other people. And I think the fact that the Supreme Court reversed on precisely this case later doesn't say much for the analysis that you employed, which frankly I find pretty alarming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.